everyone, for those who just turned up, welcome. I'm Hugo, this is Stefan.
Hi.
We're not from around here. I'm from Australia. Stefan I thought was from New Zealand, but he's actually Polish and was born in Mexico, I found out.
Yeah.
Just then. Which is cool.
I live in San Francisco.
And I live in Australia, although I spent the best part of a decade in the Americas. I'm an independent data scientist and AI scientist who works in education and tool building. Most recently, I worked with Outerbounds for a couple of years, who productize Metaflow, and they're down on the floor if you want to check them out. Stefan, do you want to just say a bit about what you do as well?
Yeah, so I grew up in New Zealand, been out in Silicon Valley since 2007. Found myself building a lot of first versions of things, data warehouse, email analytics pipelines, full stack kind of development to where I found kind of my passion, which is platform. And at Stitch Fix, where I built out the self-service platform targeting data scientists and machine learning engineers. We did a lot of build versus buy there, so I have a lot of practical knowledge in terms of how to get machine learning and other stuff to production. Since then, open source, one of the things I built, went to YC, and now drive 2 open source projects called Hamilton and Burr, and really seeing that what the knowledge that I have from the MLOps side transfers over very much to GenAI, and so excited to kind of work with Hugo here on material to help everyone ship to get GenAI to production.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that intro. And you may all be aware, but this is a 2-part workshop where today we'll be jumping into what is now called proof of concept purgatory, where we can build some nice demos, but then we'll start to see all the things around the software development lifecycle that we need to build into these things. And tomorrow, Stefan will lead a session on going deeper into first principle thinking and how to really iterate on generative AI-powered applications. I just want to get a sense of who's in the room, who has worked with like data science, data analytics, machine learning-y stuff. Cool. Who has more of a software engineering background and wants to get into?
Okay.
Wow, I wonder how you all got over that side of the room as well. We've got a few here, but some form of segregation already. I didn't mean to use that word.
No, I'm sure.
And who puts LLMs in production already? Cool. Would anybody just be able to give a quick sense of what type of software stacks you use for your LLMs in production? Open weight models or vendor APIs, what frameworks, or you do it vanilla APIs and build up, hand roll things internally? Sharing's caring, come on. Vendor APIs. Vendor APIs, cool. Yeah.
So was that?
Speak up. Cool. Great. It'd be nice to hear from you a bit later about kind of the trade-offs there and what happens. So, as I said, we're going to start with a bit of setup, essentially, where we're going to get you to go to this GitHub repository. Is that a bit fuzzy?
Yeah.
That's on there.
Yeah. Is there a way we could get a bit more clarity on the projector, or? Okay.
Or just make it larger.
I appreciate your honesty.
Just make it larger.
No, I really do, because I don't appreciate LLMs, people-pleasing and gaslighting tendencies. I'll tell you that. So just
make it larger.
Yeah, we're good. Okay, so what you're going to do is go here and go to code spaces and create a new code space. So I've already done it. So
I mean, we're doing code spaces just because we think that it might be easier setup, but if you're software engineering, you know how to check out a repo and install Python dependencies, by all means, but kind of up to you. We're trying to make this easy.
Exactly. So, and if you haven't played, who's used code spaces before? Oh, only a few people, cool. Who's used Colab notebooks? Okay. So code spaces is kind of like Colab notebooks, but you get more than a notebook. Essentially, you get some in-browser based VS Code. So I've deleted my code space, and now I'm going to create code space on main. Okay, and what we'll see is it'll start to spin up an environment, and you all should see something along these lines soon. While that's loading, we will be doing a bunch of stuff in a notebook. So what I did want to start off, Yep, I'm just waiting for it to load. Do you mind just giving me a bit more space as well? So, and if you're having problems with the code space at any point, just put your hand up and Stefan will come and help. But what we're going to be doing, this is, I'll provide a link to this. This is a figure that a friend and colleague, Hussein, put in a blog post with respect to the virtuous cycle of LLM-powered applications, where we want to start working with LLMs, but we want to start logging traces to be able to have introspect into what's actually happening with our application as soon as possible. We want to start doing evals. Essentially, all evals is doing evaluations, figuring out whether our application is meeting our end goals. And then we want to start iterating and improving the model, either through what some people call prompt engineering. I prefer the term prompt alchemy because it does really seem there's nothing engineering. There's nothing to do with engineering about what we do with prompts at the moment, or prompt incantations I like as well. Or starting to do some sort of fine-tuning, which is changing model architecture essentially with curated data. Always do prompt alchemy first, I think. Because essentially with these type of probabilistic models, essentially we're able to constrain the output space. So in a sense, and Stefan and I, there's almost a philosophical point that the model isn't just the model. The model is kind of the LLM plus the prompt in a lot of ways, because the prompt itself does constrain the output of the model space. And I think that's quite important to recognize. So what you'll see in the code space now, so if you haven't played around with code spaces that much, who's played around or uses VS Code, Visual Studio Code? Okay, great. So you all will recognize what's happening in my browser right now. So I actually like this a lot, and props to Microsoft and GitHub for providing this. They're providing a free tier for you all to use today. Of course, they have business incentives to do this as well, so it's not all, but I think it's a wonderful service, whereby on the left, you can see I've got my local file directory, I've got notebooks, I can have scripts in the middle, and I'm just wondering if I'm on the correct branch. I hope I am. And then we've got our terminal down the bottom as well, okay? So going back to the notebook, just to give a sense of what we'll be doing today, we're going to be doing our setup and initial exploration of these types of models. We're going to build almost immediately an LLM-powered information retrieval application, just using a few lines of code. Then we'll start putting a front end on it. Then we'll start thinking about logging and observability, evaluations, this type of stuff. So using these types of first principles and concepts, we're going to start building up a prototype app using frameworks. And then tomorrow, what Stefan will do will take us through how to do it in a more robust fashion, building it up from essentially using vanilla APIs.
Yeah, I mean, so there's always a tension between frameworks that do a lot and really understanding what's going underneath. So today is a little bit of the high level framing, and then tomorrow we're trying to have it so you're not really using these frameworks. You're trying to as much time that we can kind of get through in 90 minutes, obviously, but trying to give you at least the fundamental principles so that you can make an informed decision as to, if you need to do it vanilla, you have an approach to do it, and then when you're going to use a framework, you then have an idea of what the framework's actually doing.
Thank you for more of that context. So we can see now that my installs have completed. There's something, so I'm just going to maximize this, make it far larger. For a number of reasons, we've been using the package manager, for lack of a better term, Poetry. Some of us may like Poetry, others may not, but what we're going to do is we're going to shell into our Poetry environment there, and you can see we've got this PDF query environment. I'll ask you all to do the same. Can you put up your hand if you've been able to get somewhat this far in the code space?
Yeah. So, reminder, you need to be logged into GitHub to see the code spaces option. So.
Yes, very good point. Fantastic point. Many points for that point. Sorry, I'm jet lagged as well, so it shouldn't affect the quality of the content. So once we're in the code space, this is annoying. But the first thing we're going to do to just build a basic app, we're going to use a vendor API. We're going to use OpenAI, okay? Now, I don't expect everyone to have OpenAI accounts or API keys or anything like that, nor do I want anyone to have to put their credit card information into OpenAI today. I don't want any of you to have to give Sam Altman any money right now. So what I've done is I've actually created, so please be nice, I'm going to delete this API key after the fact, but for people who don't have OpenAI API keys, I've created an API key to very generously share with you all on my personal credit card. So please, I mean, you know, it has limits, but, and the way you are going to get that is bit.ly/OAI key -Austin. So this is the link you want. Okay? I can't make it any bigger than that. But when you click on that, what you're going to see, it's just going to be a Google Doc, right? Look at that. One of the greatest technologies, if anyone wants a Notion document, leave Texas now, because you're not getting... If we think AI is snake oil, don't get me started on Notion. I know all of you in startup land love linking your bloody... No, I'm kidding. So what we're going to do is, we want to make sure that your environment has access to this key. So the way we do that, and then we're going to get rocking and rolling, we're going to do export. So we're going to add this to our environment. Export, open, if I can spell correctly, OpenAI, I think it's API key. I really should know this after, you know, how many times I've done this. Export OpenAI API key is equal to, then in, yeah, what do you call them in this country? We call them inverted commas, but quotation marks, yeah, great. Quote's a verb, quotation is a noun, people. No, I'm kidding. So we're gonna export that, and that should be in our path now. And just to test that out, I'm just gonna echo OpenAI API key. Great, so we have that there. Maybe I can just get a litmus test who has been able to do that, and yep, cool. Yes, absolutely. Bit.ly, and so I would write it on a board if I had a board. Don't have a board. Yeah. Yeah, so I actually, you can see I cleverly didn't even select those myself, so I'm actually going to delete them. Okay, fantastic. Hey, Stefan, would you also mind just taking some photos at some point of the room? And don't have to now, but some point, yeah, exactly. Okay, great. So now we have that. What I want to do is us to run a little proof of concept app, okay? So what we're going to see is we've got an app called One App Query, okay? So I'm going to CD into apps, and we'll see this is a 7-line or 6-line piece of code. It's llama indexes, you know, infamous quick start or whatever you want to call it, whereby we set up from our, I've got a data file with just some text files in here, one about me that I took from my LinkedIn, I think, and then one about OpenAI's O1 Strawberry. And what we're doing is we're setting up And all of these things will become more, if you don't know what these things are, it'll become more apparent throughout the course of this workshop. We set up a simple directory, which we put the data in. Then we set up some form of database or vector store. All of these terms is just a place where we put our text, but in numerical form. Then we set up a query engine, and then we ask it this question, okay? And then we print the response. So, and we're doing all this in the terminal here. So I'm going to do Python and then just run the app. And I've asked, what is O1? Okay? So I want you all to do something along those lines. Okay, it's a new large language model named OpenAI O1, trained with reinforcement learning to perform complex reasoning. And it took that from whatever I'd pasted in here from OpenAI's announcement. Now I'm going to ask, we've got, as I said, I put in my bio or something. I'm going to write, who is Hugo? Well, that's not how you would even do it. I don't even understand why that. Who is Hugo? And I'm going to save that. We're going to have a front end pretty soon, so we won't need to worry about that. Hugo is a blah, 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 blah. And so it got out, that stuff. Now I'm going to ask, who is Stefan? So I'm just trying to stress test this to see what's happening. There is no information provided in the context about a person named Stefan. Okay, that's cool. So what I'm going to do now, just to have a sense of, and this is what I encourage everyone to do when building out these proof of concepts, is just play around with them and see what on earth is going on. I'm going to literally just copy and paste, who knows. What's that? Yep. And then create a new file called Stefan. So I don't know why I'm saying your name in a Dutch, Stefan. So I've got something called Stefan here now. The model couldn't, because there was no documents about him before. We'll just see what happens now if I say, who is Stefan? The proof is in the pudding. Stefan is the co-founder and CEO of DAGWorks, a startup focused on helping data practitioners with a powerful and flexible framework based on etc. Okay, so that's done relatively well there. Now, I would actually encourage you, and this is something we're going to do, hey, put up your hand if you have a LinkedIn page. Are there really like 40% of people here without LinkedIn pages? This is America, people. It's not like Western Australia, right? Okay, well, we'll be using your LinkedIn page. You can use mine if you want to at some point. But what I encourage you to do in a minute will be to get your own LinkedIn page and play around with it. But before we go there, what I do want to say is this is essentially what we've just built is a very basic information retrieval system. Technically, it is what we would call RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation, which is one of the popular ways of doing this type of stuff. But essentially, it's information retrieval, right? And what I really like about being able to do that in this many lines of code, now we do enter some form of proof of concept purgatory now. For example, we don't even know what prompt Llama Index just sent to OpenAI, actually. We know what I asked it, but we don't know what it crafted, okay? So there are lots of challenges that we'll run up against. But what I do want to say is that this is actually quite amazing that we've been able to, let me go back to this notebook. So in doing this in 5 lines of code, we've actually been able to abstract over a bunch of things that are actually very key to the process and that we'll learn about in the rest of the workshop, such as embeddings, like taking the text and turning it into something numerical. We've abstracted over vector stores. I mentioned them briefly because it sets up a vector index, but we haven't had to use an external vector store provider, for example. We've also abstracted over something called chunking, which is incredibly important, which is splitting the text into chunks that are manageable and queryable as well. I think it's wonderful that we're able to build something so quickly to abstract over these things, but it does introduce pain later. But I think it's great to be able to have these moments of delight immediately. The next thing we want to do though, right, thinking about the types of first principles we want to make this a bit more usable, so add a very basic front end, not something for production, but something that we can ship and share and those types of things. Then we want to start thinking about, maybe we want to start having conversations as opposed to just asking questions. Or maybe we want to start being able to introspect into our interactions with the LLM. So we want to have loggings. We want to store in a local database, for example, what's actually going on. Then we want to start evaluating them and giving feedback. So if the response was wrong, I want to be able to mark that as wrong in order to be able to iterate and improve the product we're building. So the first step of that will be putting a basic front end on the app, and what we'll see, so all the things I've been saying are essentially in this notebook as well. What we'll be seeing is we'll use Gradio. Has anyone played around with Gradio? Cool. Gradio's super cool. So it's outer Hugging Face, and it plays very nicely with all of the Hugging Face ecosystem, but a lot of other models. And it actually allows me to, in this many lines of code that you see here, to just define a basic interface, add some blocks, be able to drag a PDF onto it, and then interact with the LLM. And essentially, based on the code in the first app, I've defined some utility functions in order to extract text, look at the PDF, this type of stuff. Well, I'm happy to answer questions about that. That isn't really the point here. But what I'm going to get everyone to do is now run the second app. So it's called the app's called 2app-frontend.py. And the cool thing, once again, about code spaces is it essentially routes it so I can just look at the app locally as well in my browser. And here we have our basic Gradio app. So we'll see, you can drop a file here. You can ask a question about the PDF and see the answer. That's all we're doing for this next iteration. Now, what I want you to do is go to your LinkedIn page. If you don't have a LinkedIn page, like set one up, just build a basic something, or you can choose someone else's or whatever. What I want you to do is go to get your LinkedIn page. We're going to do it an old school way. There's a PDF. We're going to print, and you're going to save to PDF. Okay? I know this is. They have an export option. Where's the X? I'm on my own. I don't pay for LinkedIn. Yeah, they wouldn't give me an export option for free. Back in the day, LinkedIn A/B tested with this notifications up here. Remember, it used to be like a red dot, and they realized that like if they just had a red dot there all the time, people would engage more. So they did that, I think, until consumer fraud came after them. So there you go. So what we're going to do is, I've got this PDF called Austin Hugo. I've got so many. I've saved my own LinkedIn page as so many PDFs. No, I'm kidding. Well, I was preparing for this. So it's uploading. Now I'm going to ask, who is Hugo, to this PDF. And we can see processing. Hugo is a skilled, and I'm blushing, whatever app I've just, my LinkedIn page does not describe me as skilled and renowned, I'll tell you that. And I definitely have never claimed to have an impressive academic background. I've spent far too much time in academia. So that's cool. Then I'm going to just quickly see who is Stefan. Okay, Stefan is not mentioned in the provided context. That's cool. Now, I'm going to just play around with a few things. Let's say I'd done a typo and I hadn't put a space here. So I just write, who is Stefan? Who is Stefan? Stefan is a postdoctoral writer, associate writer at Yale University who's been involved in developing statistical models for the growth and structure of neurons in collaboration with experimentalists. That's not true at all. That's actually part of my academic background. So what we actually see is that we're getting a totally incorrect response. I can't even see the prompt that's been sent to my LLM. So, wow, we've already got some wacky failure mode. So this is something that I would want to log my question, the response, and give it feedback in order to start iterating on this. I do wish I had a chalkboard or a whiteboard of some sort. I think I want to draw a figure that I'll describe, which is when building software, traditional software, and then generative AI powered software, thinking about excitement as a function of time. So with traditional software, you do like a hello world and it's boring, right? And that's cool. Boring's actually really good. It's boring, you're not super excited, just build a little MVP, then you like add a unit test, then you start building out your application, then you do some load balancing, you know, all of these things, and after a while you've got something robust and exciting. What happens with generative AI powered software is the absolute opposite. You get a wonderful proof of concept at the start, a really flashy demo, and then it's like, oh wait, I've got hallucinations. And then it's like, oh wait, this isn't just a hallucination, it's something stranger than that in a sense, because it is from the PDF, but now I can't even see the prompt, I can't even introspect. And I do, this is a bit touch and go, but I do want to share, I mean, this is actually a very important blog post by our colleague Hamil Hussein called "Fuck You, Show Me the Prompt," and it's actually incredibly important because, as I just said, there are lots of tools and frameworks where it's very difficult to see the prompt, and we need to in order to introspect into our systems. Now, as an Australian, I'm all for the liberal use of cuss words. Particularly, like, people objected that this is unprofessional. I do think in this situation it was actually very warranted to use a cuss word. Cuss words can be incredibly, I've never said cuss word, I think it's because I'm in the South. I'm saying cuss. Of course, I'm actually from the real South myself. Got a question?
I'm stuck back where we're trying to do the llama.
I think Stefan may be able to help you out. So anyway, the point is that these generative AI demos are wonderful for, you know, all of us who are like on social media all the time, right? Like when we have like the attention spans of fish, it's incredible to see these demos. Particularly now LinkedIn is kind of becoming like TikTok for adults as well. But part of the idea of this workshop is to get us out of these ruts and think more in a far more principled way. So we have a question? Well, so to your question, we don't even know what this is doing. Remember, I have several files here. I have 3. Exactly. Yep. Agreed. Yep. So what was the alternative? I'm sorry? But I don't. The thing is, we don't even know how Llama Index is doing any of this at the moment, right? Yep. So what we'll see is that, once again, for demos, this is fantastic, but we want to start taking a bit more control of the embeddings and the chunkings and what context we send to the LLM and these types of things as well. So we'll start to elucidate all of these concepts as we go through. If there are other questions, I'm very happy to answer them. What I do want to do first, though, is get everyone playing around with this a bit. So I'm just going to get a bit more screen real estate by... So what I actually want you to do is create a PDF of your LinkedIn profile. Hopefully you've done that. Then upload it, start querying it, and ask questions like, what is my or what is their job title? what skills are listed, where did I go to university, because the types of things we're going to start doing is think about automating, recruitment searches and that type of stuff. If there's someone we're interested in hiring, figuring out how we can extract immediately from their LinkedIn profile in a structured format what their background is, what their skills are, what recommendations they have, how long they've stayed in each company, these types of things. Okay, so I'd like everyone to take, 5 or so minutes to play around with it themselves. And while people are doing that, very happy to answer any other questions we may have. And if you don't have a laptop and you still want to play around with this, you can actually, I think, access this code space on your cell phone. It may not be pretty, but I've definitely done that before. Do you have any questions, thoughts, feelings, hallucinations? No, so just take 5 minutes. It was who is Stefan, but if you join is and Stefan. Yeah, it's weird, man. Using my profile? Yeah, exactly. I mean, this shit's non-deterministic, so. All right, everyone. We're going to get started again. I hope you all have had as much fun as I've been having. What's your name, man? Ismat? Ismat just came up to me and he was like, hey, what was that prompt that gave you hallucinations? And I was like, who is Stefan, but with is and Stefan combined? He was like, it's weird because that worked for me. And this once again speaks to the non-deterministic nature of the type of software we're building and the probabilistic nature, which I think is very important to keep in mind all the time as we work through these things and build through these things. Stefan, quickly, do you want to just say a few words about your views on the non-deterministic nature of the software we're building?
If you're familiar with machine learning, right, there was non-determinism with respect to, data and kind of outputs, right? But with LLMs, it's on steroids, right? And so this is where the inherent in LLM is generative. It's trying to generate things from some sort of statistical sense. And so in which case, the hard part in terms of building something reliable is how do you reduce the variance of the output so that you can kind of create a, some sort of stable experience that then you can kind of sell, right? And so great example here of like, yeah, works for me, doesn't work for you, right, is something very inherent. And so, so that's effectively the main challenge that everyone needs to get over to get out of POC purgatory is to, it's kind of like facial recognition that only works for your face, right? Not very useful. So this is the kind of the challenge here of like, of getting to production.
Thank you a lot. Also on facial recognition, actually let's not talk about facial recognition. No, but what use case of facial recognition is a very good use case? What's that? So I think that's perhaps a minor convenience which probably serves the power structures of organizations a lot better than individuals, and mostly is used to see if people come into the office and clock hours and that type of stuff. So I suppose my slightly, let's say, champagne anarchist leadings may tend to say that, facial recognition probably. Having said that, when I flew here from Newark, I was in New Jersey, and they at least they said all photos taken here will be deleted after the fact. Of course, data deletion and that type of stuff. How do you verify that? But I thought that was interesting. So we're not going to run the third app, but I did want to give it to you all because this type of app is relatively easy to start hooking up with our local LLMs. Okay, and what I mean by that is one I have running on my laptop. We can even get Llama 2 running in this code space, actually, using Ollama. I'm not going to go through that, but you can do that if you'd like, and it's kind of fun, right? But essentially, if you use something like Ollama, who's played around with Ollama before? Cool. I definitely encourage everyone to check out Ollama and LlamaFile and all these different things. You can see I've got like my little Ollama logo up here. I've got my Ollama server running, so locally I could do any of this. The one thing I do want to make clear is, though, when you try to do the local app, remember I said we abstracted over the embeddings? When you do it locally, you can no longer do that. Because what actually, OpenAI cleverly has its embedding model hooked up with Llama Index. So it did all of that kind of behind the scenes. You get all types of weird errors if you don't use your own embedding model. So what you'll see here is I've had to specify an embed model here, and I've used this one from Hugging Face. I definitely encourage you all to have a play around with that locally. I'm here to chat about it all week. We can chat about it tomorrow as well. But I do think there are lots of reasons to start thinking about self-hosting and using local models. We were just kind of briefly riffing on it earlier. I think one thing is, well, there's, of course, data privacy and all of these types of things, and using open weight models and being able to fine-tune yourself locally and these types of things. But on top of that, cost considerations and latency considerations, time and money, right, in the end. So building a POC, getting a few users to use it is pretty cheap. Tokens are pretty cheap, but as soon as you start to scale things, your bills can get pretty hectic pretty quickly. Of course, on the other side of things, self-hosting requires an infrastructure engineer perhaps, and maintenance and power, exactly, and the type of headcount as well is definitely not cheap. So these are all considerations that I'd be happy to chat about. I do think, though, especially with all the really boss moves Llama and Meta are making, like with the small Llama 3.2 models, the 3B language model, the 8 or 9B vision model, I mean, we're seeing some really cool stuff. The ability to fine tune on those to be able to get out really good performance for your own use cases is fantastic. The other thing is, I presume whoever uses vendor APIs and self-hosted a pattern that we've seen a lot in the space in the past 18 months is people starting off using vendor APIs and then using the results of those conversations to fine-tune self-hosted open weight models and get them at kind of parity performance with vendor APIs. So without further ado, that was all the local stuff. I do want to jump into, as I said, we may want to start having a conversation. As opposed to the app we built, you just ask a question and get an answer. Then you can ask another question and get another answer. But for those who are experienced with these APIs will know that they don't have memory at all, right? So you need to build memory into them somehow. It's not like chatting with ChatGPT in the browser or, you know, in the desktop app. So in the next iteration of this app, we've given it some memory. And let's just have a look at what I've written there to... Yeah, so we're adding key feature of conversational memory and the ability to have back and forth. And I've included a checkbox, because it's so easy with Gradio, just to choose whether you have a local model or you're using OpenAI. And we've introduced some error handling as well. So let me then... Let's Python for app convo. And hopefully this will... I'm going to open in browser. So I'm going to select OpenAI because I haven't actually set up my Olama server on CodeSpaces, but if you've done that, you can do that. I'm going to then ask, where did Hugo go to college? Hugo attended the University of Sydney, where he earned a Bachelor of Science. That's true. Mathematics, English literature, yeah. But I actually meant no, where did he do his PhD? Okay, great. Yeah, so I did in pure math at University of New South Wales. And so that's cool. So if we'd done this in a previous iteration of the app, it wouldn't have even really known what I'd meant by this question, because it wouldn't have had the history, essentially. I encourage you all to play around with that. But these are the types of things we want to start building into our software. And now we've done this, it's actually going to become super important to start. Also, who is Stefan? We'll see what it does. Okay, I'll see whether it does this weird hallucination if I do just the who is Stefan now. No, doesn't. Interesting. So I'd want to be able to start firstly logging these conversations and being able to give feedback, and then start iterating on the application. So once again, we're kind of prototyping things. How would you think about starting to log conversations? What would be your go-to to? Text file. I like it. Anything else? Yeah, database. Both nice options. If I wanted to do a local database, Postgres, yeah. I'm going to go even more lo-fi. I'm going to do a SQLite database locally. And once again, I can do that really easily in CodeSpaces. And as we'll see in the notebook, yeah, once again, going back to this schematic, I'm sorry. In order to start, thinking about which conversations are working, which aren't, being able to look at them and evaluate them is key. So I do want to keep coming back to this image, workflow image. So Yeah, essentially, I don't want to go through this too much, to be honest. I mean, the technical details of how I'm setting up the database, you could do it with a text file or Postgres or whatever. You can do it your own way. But it's really about the proof of concept here. So essentially what I'm doing is logging all conversations in a local SQLite database called QA traces. In the code, we set up the database. Then I'll be looking into it with a tool called Dataset, DATASETTE, which I like a lot, which is Simon Willison built. So it has this type of interface essentially where you can click into conversations, feedback messages. So for those interested, we're using threading local to ensure each thread has its own connection to SQLite. Set up the database like this. Every time we start a new conversation, we connect to it and then log the conversations, etc. Once again, these implementation details. What is important is what we're doing and then how we interact with it. So I think it was app convo log. Yeah. It's 5. Okay, lucky it's only a short warning. Okay, cool. So now, hopefully, this logging works. And by the way, like I chose my own LinkedIn because I didn't want to creep on anyone else's LinkedIn. It's not due to like some innate solipsism or narcissism I have where I want to talk with an LLM about myself all the time, because that clearly isn't.
Says an Australian.
Yeah, exactly. Classic New Zealander comment, to be honest. Okay, Hugo is that dude. I wonder what if we do why is Hugo? Getting it slightly more existential now. Okay, no. What? Okay. Give me all professional details for Hugo that would help me see if he is a good fit. I'm putting that in quotation marks because it's such an obnoxious term. Is he a culture fit? For a role. I also love how we rebranded human resources, which is like the most extractive terminology one could come up with, to the people team. It's really not dystopic at all. Okay, Hugo Bowne-Anderson has a Doctor of Philosophy in, blah, 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 blah. And so something that we're going to build tomorrow essentially is adding an agent to this which will automate an email based around these types of professional details. And that speaks to the point that we really want to kind of get out structured data as well, right? So I'm going to give me them as, I wonder what happens if I just say as structured data. Please give me a JSON. Hey, okay, this isn't horrible, okay? So of course we'll want to start specifying fields. Also, perhaps, I don't know whether we're going to quite cover this tomorrow, but we should talk about it at least. There's a correctness structure trade-off that sometimes happen. If you ask an LLM or this type of system to give you back structured data of a variety of fields, it can often perform less well for each field if you ask for a collection of them in a structured sense. So you may actually want to parallelize these things as well. Yeah, so asking for name, title, job history in a structured form quite often will perform less well than if you just ask for name, then ask for title, then ask for job history. So you may want to do these LLM calls, embarrassingly parallelize them, essentially.
Yeah, so you can play around with that by asking for a lot of names, seeing if it, and asking the same thing again, or just removing things, and know the output side. because it's generational, right? It's trying to generate something. Because it's generational.
Because it's generational and trying to produce something, right? Obviously, the less you task it to generate, hopefully, it generally means that there's less variance on the outputs. So there's an interesting trade-off between the amount of stuff you ask an LLM to do versus having more LLM calls.
Would it help if you just gave it the structure that you wanted? For instance, just give me the name, the education, and job experience in this format, and then pass it as a prompt.
Yeah. So that's Hugo. I think you will be getting into this a little bit, but yeah, there are ways that you can kind of that not all models support, but the main vendor APIs do, of providing some sort of structure to help with that. But again, the same caveats I think apply, because if you're asking for 100 things versus 100 individual things, it's still generational, right? So
Exactly. So now we've got these traces in a database. You can see that I've got this database in my code space called QA traces.db. So I'm going to use dataset, which I don't think is in the environment. So I'm going to pip install. Has anyone played around with dataset before? Very much encourage everyone to. I mean, it's something Simon Willison built. So he's one of the co-creators of Django and does a lot of interesting stuff in the LLM space. He also has a really cool client utility called LLM. You pip install LLM, literally the letters LLM, and it lets you do a lot of command line interface piping and that type of stuff with LLMs, and super fun. But dataset is, as he writes here, a tool for exploring and publishing data. And actually a lot of journalists use it these days in order to explore and publish the results of their data. But it's pretty cool to play around with and check out. And we're just going to have a quick look at it now. So I pip installed it. You can do the same. I forget. Maybe I just do dataset, then the name of the database I want to look at. Let's see. Okay, cool. Yeah, look at this. Now I just have this database QA traces. I'm going to go to conversations, and this is the conversation I just had, I think. Well, 8 rows. Okay, cool. And we can see, it isn't necessarily quite in the order I wanted. Maybe I want to order with respect to timestamp. Okay, now I've got it. I've got a user message. Who is Hugo? Assistant response. Hugo Bowne-Anderson isn't in, blah, blah, blah. Why is Hugo? Silly question, blah, blah. Give me all professional details. So, anyway, once again, use any tool you want. There are lots of fun tools and interesting tools for observability. In fact, most vendors now are trying to grab your attention constantly with all the new tools for observability and these types of things.
I'll show you one tomorrow.
Yeah, but it's open source as well, which is great. A lot of people aren't even doing it open source, sadly. But anyway, the whole point is that we're able to look into these things now, and it does. Yeah, it is fascinating. It did actually quite well in getting my structured data of my. Is it valid? For what definition of valid? Yeah, that's a great question. So we won't go into the weeds with that now. So now, firstly, maybe I'll stop for a second. For those people who are coding along, who was able to do something along these lines? Okay, a handful of people. I can see arms half raised.
Yeah, if you need help, just put your hand up and I'll come around. So.
And is that the clock with the amount of time? I thought we were only an hour and a half, though. Oh, okay. Okay. So just going back to the notebook. So, as I said, we've seen good responses, we've seen not so great responses. So the next thing we want to do is to be able to start giving feedback to our application and logging our feedback in the database. So essentially, in the next version of the app called 6 App Rate Answer, very creatively named, we start logging feedback, and we have thumbs up, thumbs down, essentially, which you'll see in ChatGPT and these types of things, right? And we've added those to the Gradio interface as well. So I'm going to now run this. And I am really sick and tired of my own LinkedIn profile now. So I'm going to choose Stefan's. So we can see I've uploaded a PDF, and we can see the only difference here is I've got this thumb up and thumb down here. So who is Stefan? Okay. CEO of DAGWorks, co-creator. He has over 10 years of experience. Great, great, great. I'm going to give that feedback logged as a thumb up. And I just want to confirm, I've just got some logs here. Feedback logged, message ID, feedback 1. And so I'm encoding thumb up as 1 and thumb down as 0, okay, in the database. So we'll see that this should be logged soon. Then, did he work at Stitch Fix? Yes. As the data platform manager for model lifecycle from 2016 to June 2022. Is that correct, Stefan? Would you give that a thumb up? Great. What do you want to know about him? Does anyone have a question about Stefan? Ooh, very nice. Which city in New Zealand is he from? And this may be something that we wouldn't... Before that, I'm going to ask which country. I'm going to say, where is he from? I'm going to get to your question, but... It says you're from San Francisco. Yeah. But are you from? Okay. No, I'm going to give that a thumb down. And once again, this speaks to what your needs are. And in fact, maybe we don't want to build an app which even answers questions like that. If we're only interested in professional information, maybe the city where someone's from is totally irrelevant, okay? So once again, we're not only speaking to the technical aspect, but to like systems design stuff and what we're actually building and what the use cases are. So I'm going to say, what if I just say he's actually from NZ? Is NZ down under? Does that mean America's up over? That's what we call America. America's the empire. Well, no, I mean, you're not wrong necessarily. You know, in Asia Pacific we view things slightly differently, but where was he born? I'm going to give this a thumb down. Stefan was born on November 1, okay? When I said where was he born. And then, once again, we'll get back to your question. Which city... in New Zealand is he from? Do you know what New Zealanders call coolers? No, like Australians call them eskies, which is pretty bad because it's short for Eskimo, I think. So, Chili bins, exactly, which I think is a fantastic word. Chili bin, like a cold bin. It's chili, yeah. It's like a bin, a trash can, which, okay. So it still says he's from, okay, great. So I'm going to give that a thumb down. Now, I just want to say, this may have seemed a bit weird that we spent a bunch of time asking a bunch of random questions. Once again, when building traditional software, you want to write tests, right? And make sure your software performs as expected. Usually with traditional software, it's on average like a finite number of well-defined, well-scoped tests because you're doing a very particular thing, right? With this type of thing, one of the most amazing things about generative AI is that we're now enabled to interact with computers using natural language, right? But what that means is that we're able to interact with computers using natural language all the time, which means you can write anything. So there are essentially an infinite amount of test cases. Anyone who's built conversational AI or conversational software at any point, or data-powered software will know that even if you think you know what all the users will type into a box, you have no idea about the type of stuff that comes in, right? Like you will see everything in the end when you launch something in the real world. So going through this type of thing in order to get feedback, then rapidly iterate on the types of prompts you use, perhaps you want to fine-tune, becomes increasingly important. So what I've used 100% of included services for, well, next KPI is 1,000%. We reached 100. My investors will be happy once I hit 1,000. Okay, so what I want to make sure is that this is actually logged in the database. So once again, we've got, yeah. Oh, yeah. So what you do is, so you need to pip install dataset, but you just dataset, then the name of the database. And yeah, to Stefan's point, we've built, created, and added to a SQLite database here. Fantastic. So if I go to feedback, yeah, we'll see we've got a bunch of ones and zeros. Sick. So yeah, this message ID, we see this is one that I would have given a 1 to. If we go back, we see, yep, we have a 1. And the other cool thing about dataset, if you do want to, I mean, clearly in this particular view, I can't see all the conversations at once with feedback, but you can write essentially your own SQL queries in dataset and run the SQL, which is pretty cool. So, what I want you to take 5 or 10, yeah, we'll get to that in a second. I want you to run this code. I want you to drop in any page you want. I mean, we chose LinkedIn for the obvious reasons. And tomorrow we'll be building an actual app that will auto-generate an email based on it in an agentic approach. But what I want you to do is start playing around with this, take 5 or 10 minutes, use the app to ask questions about whatever PDF you drop in, provide feedback, and then use Dataset or another tool to just have a look to make sure that it was logged correctly. So we will actually take 10 minutes for that because I want you all to play around with it. And for those who aren't coding, feel free to ask questions or take a quick break. But there were questions from the room. Yeah. Correct. Yep. Exactly. Yeah. All we're doing now is doing some sort of evaluation, but not using it yet. That's right. But we'll be doing more of that tomorrow. Hey. So this is a really good question. So we're not. It depends what your process actually is. Okay. So there are several things. So what we've done is we've started evaluating our interactions, right? We haven't changed our model based upon those interactions. Now, if you start fine-tuning on that type of data, you may be able to get it to do that. If you're doing prompt engineering or prompt alchemy, I mean, essentially what you would do is over-index on using prompts that encourage it to hallucinate. So you would get that. Whereas the other approach, of course, is before doing any fine-tuning or something like that, start asking prompts which result in better performance and only allow those prompts, essentially. So to the example we said earlier, instead of having one master prompt, which is give me all professional history, perhaps you break it into several prompts, such as give me their name, give me their current job, how long they've been there, give me this, give me that, and then you combine it into structured output yourself. And that's what you'll see is that doing that type of prompt engineering will often result in better results. Does that make sense? Cool. Well, let's code for a bit and play around with the apps, and then we'll have another half hour left. Do you know the URL for our Maven calls? Oh yeah, got it. And would you mind, what was the code? Great. What do you want? Yeah.
Kind of related to what you're saying about like parallel asking queries or asking sequentially. Every now and again I'll be asking it, hey, can you write me a predictive action that then do certain functions. And then it'll kind of like give me an answer that works really workable, and then I'll be like, okay, what if we do it this way, and then
Yeah.
how the implementation might work. And then it'll give me like kind of like that plus like the incorrect answer.
Right.
What do you think's going on there? Like it's all black box.
Yeah. I wonder, is this using the API or? Yeah, I actually think sometimes what I've found happens with in web apps because of their history. Often, if you have 3 or 4 turn interactions, then it kind of gets stuck in a local minima, and it just can't get out. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I think whatever it's doing with the history of the conversation, it over-indexes on something it said, and it's just unable to budge because of that. Well, it contains a lot of like wisdom of the crowds and intelligence, but the other thing, I mean, we haven't talked about this explicitly, they can't do math properly, can't count properly, and computers we expect to be good calculators, so...
I can't do math? I thought that like it was really good like academic.
Yeah, but sometimes we'll get 2 + 2 wrong, right? Probabilistically, right? So... Yeah. And then the other one is, surprisingly, finds it very difficult to count the number of R's in a strawberry.
Yeah, I've seen that one.
Yeah. So
Maybe there's somebody out there who's doesn't know that's supposed to be very spends a lot of time doing it.
it's unclear, and I do think, just recognizing that we are dealing with something probabilistic that is not doesn't conform to our mental model of computation. Like it is something very new in that sense. So very buyer beware stuff. Yeah, for sure. What's your name? Sean. Sean. Hugo. Nice to meet you. What's up? Hmm? You want to come up or shoot? I mean, it's all in this code in this app, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I need to run this.
Yeah. Yep. Cool.
So I install the database. I did the install, quick install the.
Oh, data set. Yeah.
So then.
And then you. Then, sec. 1 second. Oh. This command, dataset, then the name of the database.
Okay.
Yep.
The database name should be that, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, you'll see it. You'll see it here.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool.
All right, we'll get started in another minute. Just a bit of shameless self-promotion and promotion of Stefan. So Stefan and I are actually teaching an online. Hey everyone, sorry. I just want to tell you one thing. Stefan and I actually just announced we're teaching a 4-week workshop next year in January about building this type of thing, but extended into 4 weeks, building LLM applications for data scientists and software engineers. There's an early bird discount of $800 on maven.com. We also have a code for people we teach to. More generally, if you use the code GenAI-200, so I'll put this in the doc, you'll get another $200 off, and these will be valid until the end of November. If you can't afford this type of stuff, or if your work won't pay for it or that type of stuff, come and chat with me as well, because I want to help people learn as much as possible. And there's this bit.ly link will take you there. So bit.ly/GenAI-2025. And if you know people who'd be interested, feel free to let them know as well. That was just a bit of shameless self-promotion, but you're all still here after listening to us for over an hour, so that means you may be interested. Or you may be asleep. So in the final 20 minutes or so, I just want to step back a bit, because we have been using Llama Index, we have been using frameworks, we've seen the types of challenges that can arise. But tomorrow, what we're really going to start doing is using vanilla APIs, using the actual APIs, and then building up from these types of first principles, such as using APIs through to observability, logging, traces, that type of stuff. And in order to do that, what I wanted to do was kind of introduce you to these types of APIs. So we haven't even really interacted with the OpenAI API yet. We've kind of done it through Llama Index, right? So who has pinged a vendor API before? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, maybe half the room, something like that. That's cool. So if you've done that before, I think you'll get something out of this, because we'll be figuring out how to set some knobs and these types of things, such as controlling temperature for creativity and changing the probabilities, these types of things. But I did want to say a few things about how to ping these APIs. So in order to do this, we'll be working in the notebook. And so I want to set the API key as that. Putting in my environment. Okay, so it's asking me to choose a kernel source, of course. So I'm going to install. So anyone who wants to run this code, watch what I do now. Because when I teach this, people who don't watch it then say afterwards, how do I do this? Okay, so I just tried to execute a cell. Now I want to install, enable suggested extensions, Python and Jupyter. Okay, so that's just going to take a couple of moments. While that's happening, I do want to tell you. No, this is actually using a notebook in code spaces. It's using a Jupyter or IPython kernel, but I don't think it's technically a Jupyter notebook actually. It's some code Visual VS Code notebook, and I say that because you think you know what your shortcuts are and what your keyboard bindings are, and then you get in here and it's Freaky Friday. So now I want to choose an environment. I'm going to go to Python environments and choose the PDF query environment. Okay, so once again, if you want to execute this, watch what I'm doing, because otherwise you will say to me afterwards, how do I do that? It actually, so select kernel will do it, but it also does it when you try to execute a cell. All I said was I execute a cell, and then the drop down offers me Python and IPython and Jupyter extensions. So it looks like we're good to go there. Now, what I'm doing here, I'm importing OpenAI, setting up a client, and then essentially it's all for good reason, but the APIs aren't necessarily the most pleasant things to interact with all the time. You'll see even to get out a message, I have to use this client.chat completions, create, specify the model, specify, as a JSON in a list essentially, or something on a dictionary in a list, a dictionary of user key value pairs with strings in them in a list, and then once I get out the result, I have to print completion.choices, then take the first slice of it, and then find the message attribute. Okay, now I understand why we have to do that. There are lots of nice packages that wrap around this, which mean you don't, but it can be annoying code to write, so you end up writing a lot of utility functions. But, okay, last time I executed this, I said, so I wanted to specify the role, so that's the user. Like, this is just when you chat with ChatGPT, these are the messages you send. We'll see in a minute, you can specify system prompts where we can say, you are a helpful assistant that will do X, Y, and Z. Or you're Mario, or Yoda, speak like Yoda, these types of things, right? I'm going to execute this again in a second, but I just want to say, I like this joke. Why was the math book sad? Because it had too many problems. I think that's a good LLM joke. I asked ChatGPT once to give me like 20 domain-specific variations on why did the chicken cross the road, and it gave me a mathematical one. It was, why did the chicken cross the Mobius strip to get to the same side? Which I just love. So why don't scientists trust atoms? Because they make up everything. I mean, baked into that is a materialist worldview, but I suppose it's acceptable. So then we can. So what did I do there? Yeah, that actually, I'm sorry, that didn't even print the bloody, that printed this chat completion message. What if I just want the string to come out? Then I need to actually get the content out. And we'll see, now it's printed that, okay? So as I said, that's just specifying the user prompt. What if I wanted to give it a system prompt? And actually, let's see, ChatGPT, actually I won't do this now, but if you've played around with system prompts in ChatGPT, you'll know about it, but you can actually go into ChatGPT, the app, and say, I want you to respond like a pirate all the time. Or you can go into a friend's ChatGPT app and do that. And it's funny, because they don't know why their ChatGPT is constantly responding like a pirate. Once again, when you're pinging the API, you can do something similar. So I've given it a system prompt here. You are Mario from Super Mario Brothers. Answer as Mario the assistant only, okay? Okay, why did the golfer bring an extra pair of pants in case he got a hole in one? That's the only funny thing about golf, I think. And so it ends with woohoo, which you know, anyone who came up in the 90s will recognize as Mario. That's the only, I would have liked a bit more Mario in there, to be honest, but it did add a woohoo at the end, okay? And this one added a wahaha. So, okay. So now I just wanted to get a bit more specific to make sure that it was actually being Mario. And we'll see, you are Mario from Super Mario Brothers. Answer is Mario. Where do you live? It's a me. I can't do the, yeah, are we allowed to do the Italian accent? Because that's punching sideways, or it's also I lived in New Haven in Connecticut for a while. I don't know if people know, great pizza there, but all the pizza places are called A Pizza. Like there's a place called Modern A Pizza. A Pete's. So I always wonder whether that was just like a racist interpretation of what Italians are like. So I'm getting slightly edgy here. What's that? Yeah, the chief people officer has already cut me off from my code space. Yeah. Oh, I see a meeting on my Google Calendar in 15 minutes with HR. I wonder what's happening. I'm just joking, by the way, people. I want to make that very clear. Not about HR, though. I'm very serious about HR's job is to protect the company, not you as an employee. I want to make that very clear, okay? And middle management is about, they're essentially bouncers for the executive, so you can't get to them. That's the role of middle management. This is one of the greatest things about LLMs, though. We're going to replace all middle management with APIs soon. It's going to be a riot. Okay, so we've seen how we can interact with an API. Once again, we don't have memory, though. We've seen how we can have a system prompt to get it to respond. And of course, you maybe don't want it to be Mario, but maybe you want it to be a helpful, polite assistant, right? Or something along those lines. Like if you're a customer service chatbot, perhaps you want to give it instructions on to be incredibly helpful, kind. What's that? Posh British guy. Yeah. Like everybody ever watched The Nanny? Mr. Sheffield, right? The posh British guy. Silver Fox. So we've done this with OpenAI. Now, I'm not giving you an Anthropic key, but if anyone has one, you can play around with this. What I just wanted to show you, though, is how it's pretty straightforward to do this with a variety of models. And I also suggest people, actually, I taught a workshop at PyData NYC yesterday where we used Grok. Now, like you can use Grok or not, I really don't particularly care. But one cool thing about Grok, and I'm surprised not many providers have this. Gemini has a free tier, but Grok has a free tier where you can use all of these models for free. So I use it for workshops quite often where you get your Gemma models, your Llama models, Lava, which is multimodal, Mistral's Mixtral, mixture of experts, and then a variety of speech-to-text ones as well. So I definitely encourage people to play around with that. But what I did want to demonstrate is that the type of principles we're talking about are totally at play with all APIs. What we just did, we can do with any API. So I'm going to, I don't think I had this in my environment, so I'm going to pip install Anthropic. And actually, look, why not? We're all here having a good time. So I will just get you see, even getting an API key, I mean, API keys, create key. So if anyone wants to do this, I'm just going to paste this in the doc as well. Please don't like set up some giant automated bot that canes my limit, but yeah. Yeah, that's some weird colonial vibe happening, isn't it? Cane. I didn't even realize. Do you not use the word cane like kicked? Yeah. Do you? Well, no. I just had a memory. Johnny in year 4 at Paddington Public School in Sydney, he got caned. We all saw him got caned. He did something horrible where the teacher brought out a ruler and it was, I think it was one of the last times it was even legal. This was this was like 91. It was still legal for teachers to take a kid up the front of the room and get out a ruler and smash his hands with it. Getting caned. Horrible. Sorry, I just traveled, didn't I? I really appreciate you all coming on this journey with me. Yeah, that was not a... Poor Johnny. Great. Okay, so now I'm doing... I'm using a system prompt. Respond only in Yoda speak. Okay, how are you today? Clears throat and speaks in a croaky voice. Well, I am today, young Padawan. The force strong in me, it flows, and so on. So we've got that. That's... This is actually really important question. I can't remember in OpenAI, you specify it in messages as role system content. In Anthropic, you specify it as a system quag, essentially. And look, we're nearly at time. I did want to say something fun you can do, and that I've done here, is we've got 2 APIs now, right? We've got Mario OpenAI and Yoda Claude. So why don't we just get them to chat with each other, okay? So that's essentially what I've done here. I've got a function, a function which is get Anthropic response and get OpenAI response, get them chatting, give an initial message from OpenAI, Mario. It's me, Mario. I live in the Mushroom Kingdom with a Princess Peach and all my friends. He still doesn't know about Bowser. It's really concerning. And Yoda says, in the Mushroom Kingdom you live, careful. Oh, I love this. Careful I must be, copyrighted material to avoid. Create my own words. This is seriously weird, isn't it? Okay. No, this is... Yeah, no, Yoda really wants coins to collect and baddies to defeat, a classic quest it is. Oh, careful we must be to create our own story and not copy others. So Yoda is quite concerned with, it must be all the lawsuits. I love that we're kind of infringing Star Wars copyright by even doing this, so maybe that's the impetus behind it. We're not going to go through this so much today, but all the code is here. As I mentioned, these conversations don't have history when you ping an API. So, of course, there's a lot of work going into how we think about creating history. The silliest way, of course, is to prepend the entire conversation to the message. So that's what I've done here. Question? But you have to say that. My point is that if you ping it once and then ping it again, it won't remember the first interaction. So I think I have an example. Yeah, if I gave it a prompt saying my name is Hugo, and then I say, what's my name? It won't remember it. So I need to encode that somehow. But you can do it that way, that's right. And then something we may talk a bit more about tomorrow, but is thinking through, I just want to give you a sense of how to kind of turn knobs on your LLMs, such as parameters like temperature and top P. So temperature essentially controls the randomness of the model's output, okay? So low temperature will produce predictable, precise response, precise, as predictable as one can expect. And higher encourages creativity and leads to more varied and unexpected responses. So you can see the examples here. I've literally said, you are Mario, and tell me about your day. For low temperature, it says, it's a me, Mario. Today has been very busy, getting higher. Whoa, it's me, Mario. Today has been fantastico. Then temperature 2, it's a me, Mario. Today's super exciting, just like every other day. I went on some hero, and then it just freaks out completely, right? So clearly something pretty creative is happening there. And what top P does is essentially, it manages the diversity of responses by filtering output. So the higher it is, the more varied the completions will be. So you can play around with that. And you can then combine temperature and top P in order to get different types of outputs, essentially to balance kind of randomness, coherence, creativity, these types of things. And you can look through all those examples there. We are going to wrap up in a few minutes. What I want to do, there are two things. I really would love all of your help with this. We want to make this workshop as good as possible. And in order to do that, we've got just a little Google form that I would love for you to, it's a 5-minute survey as to what you got out of it, what you'd like to see more of. Of course, we've got the second session tomorrow. So if you wouldn't mind completing that now, that would be super useful at bit.ly/Austin-feedback-AI. And then Stefan, perhaps you could give people a bit of insight into what we'll be covering tomorrow so that people get as excited as possible.
Sure. So yeah, tomorrow we're going to be kind of building off of kind of this last session of like, Hugo showed how you're using kind of the vanilla APIs. And so we're going to be kind of trying to circle back around a little bit to a Gradio app that underneath you're building out to kind of use these APIs, but then thinking more of like, okay, well, what is the software development lifecycle implications? So in 90 minutes, it's going to be, a little fast, but like try to give you at least the mental model and structure for you to kind of like position things. So then when you come to, think about it, you have some options or you've thought about it before in terms of how you're designing your systems, thinking about framing of like, well, how do you make things easier to test? And so really trying to get to the more of a, you could say, things that will hopefully you could ship with when you go back to work type thing. But and so if there's anything you missed out of today or you want to see more of tomorrow, this is where I have a chance to incorporate some of that feedback. So if you do use the form, feel free to add in something there, and I'll do my best to try to incorporate it. But otherwise, excited for tomorrow and seeing hope and being able to walk away with something interesting that will hopefully give you a sense of how you can ship something to production.
Right, well, thanks, Stefan, and thank you all for joining today, and we're excited to learn more and teach more tomorrow as well.
And otherwise, we're still around if you need help setting up or you missed some sort of environmental stuff, but cool.
Yeah, come and chat. We're here for the rest of the conference, or also connect on LinkedIn if you have a LinkedIn. Yeah,
I'm also downstairs at a small community booth as well, so
Firstly, who was here yesterday? Okay, 80% of people, so that's cool. I thought, just to give a quick recap, essentially what we want to be doing, starting to think about building LLM-powered applications from first principles. So we wanted to give a sense of how to build them quite easily, but then using Llama Index and Gradio and these types of things to get up and running with a POC, but then realize how we really need to then start introducing tracing, logging, evaluations, observability. So we built up an app yesterday that did all of these things using a variety of custom tools by having, a local SQLite database, using dataset to introspect into your traces, having basic feedback mechanisms, thumbs up and thumbs down in the app, and being able to iterate using prompt engineering, or as we called it, prompt alchemy, because there's nothing engineering about it. Today, we're actually going to kind of start at the other end using vanilla APIs and then start building up a slightly agentic application. So maybe, do you want to give a brief rundown of?
Yeah, so right at the end of yesterday, we were kind of starting to, just use the vanilla OpenAI kind of API calls. So we're going to build off of that and kind of, start to build out a bit of an app. In terms of the goals for this session really is like, motivate the need for a great software development lifecycle, because if you're interested in shipping to production, that's really kind of what you need to think through to be able to make this whole entire kind of process work. Going to briefly go over frameworks, since we use Llama Index today. We're going to use Burr, one of the frameworks I created today, and just kind of just to give you a little bit of picture of what to use when, or at least how to think about choosing something, and then effectively as a kind of have you build a little closer to the prompt, so have you control that more directly, right? And so then a few things to kind of leave you with will be some common ways or thoughts on, if you are going to be building an application, what are the kind of shapes? And so there is a pipeline kind of shape, then there is more agentic, and then agent and human in the loop. And so we won't, in 90 minutes, won't be able to dive deep into all of them, but just to give you a little bit of a sense or a taste of, at least in a mental model for what these are. And then, as we're building out this app, try to reinforce at least some of the things that you'd need in a software development lifecycle, right? So some of that, particularly covering like thinking about testing and eval. Not going to be able to go deep, but just to give you, the thought of having, opening up for discussion and questions, right? To kind of how to frame or think about it, and then also just making sure that there is. You can evaluate an LLM, but then if you're building an app, you've got to make sure that you can evaluate more of the macro. So how does it impact the business, etc. Yeah.
We'll also provide a set of resources to continue this work, stuff you can look at afterwards. We appreciate that, an hour and a half yesterday and an hour and a half today is really, all tip and no iceberg, as some may say. But there is a lot more to do, but we'll provide resources, and we're on GitHub and LinkedIn and Twitter, so we're always here to chat and reach out as well.
Yeah. Let's see. And so, in terms of, there will be a bit of a choose your own destiny. So there will be, really complete apps, and there will be apps that a version of it, which if you really want to, just write some of the code yourself, there will be like kind of spaces for. So in terms of just trying to cater to, people's different levels here. And then part of those exercises will be just to get you to kind of, write some code, think about the non-determinism and structured output, since that is something that is now becoming pretty common or standard of you wanting to get stuff out of the LLM. And then just to build off the resources section, so depending on, I mean, given 90 minutes, I'm not sure we'll be able to get too far into this, but you might have questions of, once you get to production, now what? We might have one or two things here, but largely, won't have too much time. Multimodal, sorry. We're going to stick with just plain LLMs, so we're not going to deal with images here, but suffice to say what we're going through is going to give you at least a mental model of how to approach those. And then in terms of RAG, we're not going to touch the retrieval part. So that is more of a search problem. And so instead we're going to focus more on the generation, which is at least the key part you need to understand first before trying to optimize more of the retrieval augmented part. And if you don't know what those mean, don't worry, I'll cover that in a bit. in terms of while that was going, hopefully everyone else's code spaces were installing. So the only other last part of our setup is that we need to, so if the OpenAI key from yesterday is deprecated, so we need to go grab a new one. So if you go to, I can zoom in, bit.ly/OAI key -Austin. If you type this in, maybe your browser will have recommended it. It will bring you here, right?
That's the key I deprecated.
You deprecate which one? What's the new one?
The first one.
Okay.
What, did you put one in?
No. This is, you had one for Anthropic. Did you add one?
I'll just add another one now.
All right.
I'll add one that I will generate right now.
Okay. Sorry.
I was interested in, because we had 60 people here yesterday, I think maybe 50% used the key, and it cost 60 cents for everyone to use that key for. That may sound like it scales, but funnily, it doesn't if you do that in your organization. And you ship a product to a lot of users, that will be paid. Okay, I'll just put it in.
Okay. So Hugo just put in a new key, so we're just going to cut and paste that. And then in your terminal, you're going to want to do export OpenAI API key. We're going to do quotes. I need to say allow, and then, okay. So that's the setup. Yeah, if you need help, Hugo's around, but just to kind of move on a little. So first I'm going to go through some motivation. So let's see. So if I can do that. So shipping traditional software, right, is pretty easy. I think if I recall, most of you guys were kind of software engineers. To ship software, traditional software, right, is like you wrote an MVP, and then to make it reliable to something you could ship, you wrote tests, and then maybe added something observability like Datadog. Very cookie cutter, very standard. You can kind of put this into a sprint model, and then any changes you make are very easy to ensure some reliability. But with LLMs, right, this is you can't use that model, right? It's not like you can just write some unit tests and you're away, as we'll kind of find out through this exercise. There's a plethora of frameworks that help you, with 3 lines of code, get something up. I like to, my analogy is they help you build facial recognition just for your face, but if you can't ship it more broadly, it's not that useful. And so the challenge here, and I guess one of the reasons why you're interested is, how do we get out of POC purgatory and get to something reliable that we can kind of ship? In general, you're going to be building out a platform of sorts, right? These are going to be you're going to be adding things across depending on how complex your product is, how much reliability you need, right? So understanding what the LLM call did, which is commonly called tracing. So you can do prompt engineering is one thing, right? And then if you start to do more complex things like retrieval augmented generation, then you're going to have to start to measure the inputs of what you put in. And then depending on your bank, there's various things that you're going to kind of want to add in. So just to give you a bit of a picture of like, we're only, the tip analogy is very apt, right? But effectively, because of the non-determinism, right? And then depending on how many LLM calls you have and what products you connect with, there's going to be, a lot potentially to build out and integrate with. And so your regular software development lifecycle, right, is going to get more expensive. Most of your most of the cost in software is actually in maintenance, right? And so with GenAI, it's not like you can just ship a product, an API, and go away. You now have to monitor. You now have to maintain it, right? And so this is going to change, how you ship and deliver software. And so this is the Wild West, candidly, right? Best practices are still emerging, right? But and a lot of these problems are new to people. But in terms of if you've done machine learning before, classic AI had these exact same problems. The difference is that building a traditional classic AI model took a lot longer than just hooking up ChatGPT, right? And so you encounter these problems much slowly in more of the classic sense. But the same constructs are applied where you had to basically, to get from something unreliable to reliable, you added different parts of observability, right? And again, this is really the Wild West. And so to me, like, the end goal of this process is like, hey, how can we avoid such a costly way to build something? Instead, can we shift this curve to the left so that we can, build more cheaply, easier, faster, kind of iterate, and then if we need more reliability, it's a very clear and kind of linear process to do so. Unfortunately, I mean, or fortunately or unfortunately right now, there's a lot of choice. And so, but then that also brings challenges. So do you want to deal with 5 different vendors? That's something that, or do you just want to deal with one? And so this is where, this landscape is still evolving. But ideally, can we, get to leaner teams, being able to have more capabilities for cheaper and faster? And so ideally, right, this is where we need to build out a process that is more like, rather than it being the Wild West and people figuring out themselves, it's like building the road and the car so people can move faster and drive on, together in one direction, so to speak. And then also a GPS to help people, navigate to where they need to get to for their reliability needs. So that's the kind of mental picture of where we a great software development lifecycle should take you towards. And so I think I pulled the cart before the horse here, but yeah. So hopefully this gives you a little bit of motivation for the importance or the coming importance of the software development lifecycle here, and largely right. And this is where frameworks can help or hinder, and so this is a segue into the next section. But questions, anyone on that? Right. So, so in terms of frameworks, right? So in the software development lifecycle, right, we could build all the software, we could build all the integrations ourselves. Obviously, as engineers, we only want to spend time on the things that are valuable. So in which case, a framework or two can make sense. The way that I like to think about frameworks is, number one, is they should be helping you reduce code that you don't want to write. And so yesterday, I think was a great example of Llama Index. We could do something in 3 lines of code. So if I zoom out, right, in these apps, where's the first one? Like in 3 lines, a couple of lines of code, right, there was a lot. If I didn't want to write a vector database store and an ingestion thing, like it kind of, these lines do its job, right? But there's a bit of a, well, just jumped ahead here. So, and so they should, help you do that, right? But then they should also not slow you down in the end. And so this is really where you need to understand and, what are your needs going to be, and what are you going to need to change? And so this is where it's commonly you kind of see, demos and POCs, right, have different needs than production. And so in this example here, for example, Llama Index actually, abstracts away the prompt that was called, right? And so if we wanted to optimize it, right, it is a little more challenging since we would have to dig into the internals of the framework, right, to really kind of understand that. And so, but and if we need to really, in which case that can help, that could potentially slow us down more than if we just from the beginning controlled the actual API call itself. And so, slightly subtle point, but basically, is that kind of making sense? There's this inherent trade-off when you're picking frameworks as to, what code they're helping you reduce, but then potentially making other things more difficult. And so, just to give you an example, so I added a 5th version. So I'm going to show a new framework called Burr, but I'm not going to introduce that just yet. But just to give you a bit of a sense of how much Llama Index is doing and hiding under the hood from you, if you don't have to necessarily follow along here, but if you, let's see if I go to apps and then run the 5th app, but with Burr, and then I'll go over this in a second in another place. Let's see as this boots up. Open the browser. I'll do both the same. we have the Gradio app we kind of built yesterday. I'm going to just drop in the PDF about myself and say who is let's just do who is Stefan, and let's see, this will happen. So okay, oh, it just came back. All right, cool. And do live. So just to give you a sense of what Llama Index was doing. So if I close this, we can see this a bit better. So, yeah, I was going to say thanks. Good call. So, open telemetry is a protocol, and so the way that I'm getting this telemetry is through that. If you're curious, but just in this one call, right, where we kind of said who is Stefan. On the back end, if you remember, it was taking this PDF, chunking, parsing it, and kind of doing some magical things with it. This is the actual LLM call that it was kind of sending out, right? It was sending out a system prompt, right? It's kind of, this is something that was hidden from us. It is then sending in some content. So this is the, I just kind of closed it, but this is the extracted PDF. You can kind of see here, this looks like, my LinkedIn kind of resume. And then you can kind of see here that it then, at the end of it, right, it is providing all this context at the beginning, so context information is below, and then right at the end of it, it is then, putting in that query that we put in, who is Stefan?
I think you made this clear, but it's amazing that we're able to get out the prompt as well. Because yesterday, when just using a framework like Llama Index, it's unclear to see what actual prompt is sent to the LLM, which of course motivated Hamil's blog post that we talked about yesterday, if you show me the prompt.
Yep. Yep. And if you notice here, I mean, we didn't have any control over this. The only thing was a little bit of like, what the document is and, what the inquiry was. Just to give you a sense, I don't know if you spotted, but like to me, the default grammar here isn't sound the best English. So maybe that gives you a little bit of an idea of whether people are actually looking at their prompts when using Llama Index, because else someone might have fixed it. But just the example here that I'm showing is these frameworks abstract a lot, right? And so, if you really need to optimize and do stuff, then potentially, Llama Index will actually make it more difficult for you than otherwise. But it's great at helping you get started. And so this is where part of today's session will just be getting you to play with it. But like if you're going to build something reliable, because of the generative nature of things, you really need to reduce the variance of outputs, right? And so this is where I think the best strategy is really being able to control more of the prompts. And so that's kind of what we'll do today. And then I mean, the one last point here is if you can kind of understand from these first principles of what you're actually doing underneath from the vanilla calls, it would actually help you better assess these frameworks as well as to like when they're useful, when you want to delegate to them versus not. Okay. Any questions? Right. Yeah.
So your point on that, on the prompt, part of it is we've not seen before,
Mm-hmm.
that we can't ensure the quality of the prompt or what's going on, so we really don't have control.
Or at least they might give you some hooks, but then like this is where it's like it's not 3 lines of code anymore. How much do you have to really understand that framework to then be able to control and edit it and change it and tweak it, right? And so this is where it's a trade-off. And so this is where some of these frameworks have graduation kind of problems where it's great for a POC, but you graduate out because it's easier for you to build something yourself or some smart part of it than necessarily trying to understand the abstractions that they built in to kind of modify. So, yeah.
Question on telemetry.
Yep.
Do you recommend, or would you okay to recommend have the telemetry on the framework side, or telemetry on the LLM server side?
I mean, both doesn't hurt. Part of it probably depends a little bit on like what your internal setup is and who's controlling what or who wants oversight of what. Yeah, I mean, I could see a world where you use both, but like it really kind of it depends on a few things internally. But I think the key point is you want telemetry, and so whatever's works best for your organization. Cool. So in terms of the way that I like to kind of I think otherwise frameworks I think broadly fall into two classes. Can I minimize this? No. So one is there are these Giga libraries. So Llama Index and LangChain fall into this. They're opinionated. They have a lot of off-the-shelf components, right? They have an ecosystem you can buy into. But also the downside is they also have a lot of like Python dependencies or large dependencies. So that can that can be a bit of a nightmare potentially to manage. The other side is, which we're going to be using today, is I view them more as kind of construction or glue frameworks. So who here has used Fast API before? Yeah. Okay. So does Fast API get in your way of your business logic? No. Right. And so that's kind of, but Fast API is really good at connecting an HTTP request with you calling some business logic, right? And so this is where kind of the vibes that I have, which is, Llama Index is not that, right? It is, it is like a full shebang, whereas something like Fast API, and in which case I'll be showing you Burr, is more on the line of, helping you construct and glue your business logic together. And so what this means is that these are generally neutral, allow you to bring a lot of different tools, and also have generally small dependencies, so then it's easier to manage from a dependency standpoint. So then, question, which do you use when? Does anyone have any strong opinions? So do you use, when would you use either one of these? Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. So, in terms of a broader context, would you use them? I guess. I mean, great to start with. Help you getting started, right? In terms of, I mean, this is basically the point is that there isn't really a right answer here. Part of it, it depends on your context and where you want to go with it. But yeah, like if you're going to be swapping out different providers, then you potentially want to maybe look at frameworks that are optimizing to make that really easy. Any more thoughts? Okay. And I think I've belabored this, but I think it's time to say, in terms of anyone who was thinking about RAG, we're not going to focus on the retrieval side. We're instead just going to focus on, given a PDF, getting the text out of it and doing something with it. But and it's really important to understand, what you do with that context and get a handle of it. And then once you get a handle of that, then it's, then it makes sense, I think, to explore and work more in terms of, how you retrieve context for it. But just to kind of set expectations, if anyone was wanting that, sorry, we're not going to cover it. And that's what I kind of said. All right. So in terms of the, the software development lifecycle, so just to get, again, I guess I'm doing a little too much setup before writing too much code. But effectively, I want to zoom out. Hugo put up this picture yesterday. And this is from Hamel. Sorry, I'm like trying to zoom out, but I'm zoomed in. This lifecycle is kind of something that we're going to try to at least play around with, or at least get your hands dirty as much as possible in terms of trying this out. So we're going to do some little LLM invocations. We're going to, at some point in the second part of the exercise, talk about like testing or kind of tracing and think about eval a little bit. We're not going to do fine tuning. This prompt engineering will be dependent on what you want to do. But otherwise, this is kind of the loop that we're going to kind of walk through a little bit. Cool. So in terms of the exercise today, I thought something that would be fairly accessible, or at least something that you can all kind of imagine, is maybe trying to write a recruiting email assistant. So say you're an engineer or you're a recruiting hiring manager yourself, and you're tasked with kind of writing emails. And so building off of our PDF kind of LinkedIn extraction thing, we're going to try to build at least a little bit of an app to do that. So if you need PDFs, I've linked them here so you can see to this shared Google Drive, which you should all have access to. And you can then pull mine or Hugo's if you need something to play around with, if you don't want to play around with yours. In terms of setup, just make sure you have your OpenAI key, but just to refresh what we went through yesterday is that, anyway, pull questions. So yesterday, right at the end, we went through doing vanilla OpenAI calls. So hopefully it's oh, yes, I need to install extensions still. The key thing that for today's purpose is, or the thing to hopefully you took away from yesterday is that with these API calls, a lot of them are standardizing on messages. And where the back and forth because of a chat component is you're basically specifying who's talking and what the kind of response was. And you're sending this every single time you're sending to an LLM, so the LLM has full context when it's trying to generate something. And so for the purposes of the exercise of today, you're going to be, if you want to write code, you're going to be filling in some of these details just to kind of set this up so you can kind of reinforce that point. In terms of just to kind of set expectations, this is a vanilla API call, and so when I'm referring to calling an LLM, I'm referring to code that looks like this. A quick reminder in terms of prompting techniques. We didn't quite cover this. There's a lot of literature here in terms of how do you prompt engineer and how you do stuff. If you hear words like zero shot, one shot or multi or n shot prompting, I have some examples here. Something that you can refer to as we're going to kind of go through the exercise, but just to mention that they are here, but not required for us to really understand right now. Otherwise, questions yesterday, people had, in case you don't know, from an ops perspective, right, what you're actually paying for when you send to ChatGPT is you're paying per tokens. What is a token? A token is a letter or a syllable or a symbol if you're thinking a Chinese script, right? And so you are paying for, they have different tiers for generally for input tokens and output tokens. And so if you're ever curious, most of these vendor APIs actually return the token usage for you, so you can always compute cost. And so with this OpenAI completion that I did kind of above here, if you just do OpenAI completion dict, right? Both environments, that one. You can kind of see here that, I need to run this actual code. I didn't pass in my OpenAI key. Oh, one part of setup that I did not do. Let's see. Sorry. So if you are getting the same error as I am, you can just input this, and then I got a chat completion. And so if you want to see cost, it's just a matter of looking at the dictionary, and you kind of see here that under usage, you can kind of see all the different tokens that we're kind of used. Cool. So just to set up a little bit of the first app, if you go under Email Assistant under V1, there is, what we're going to build out is a little version of kind of what we did yesterday, a much simplified version, but one that just basically takes in a PDF and we can kind of query something with an LLM with it. In terms of the setup here, I have split out the Gradio app into app.py. And so you can kind of see here the kind of the Gradio code. delegates to a function called run pipeline. And the purpose of this is to then build a pipeline. The code for the pipeline is in one of two modules. And so if you want the pre-built code-ready one, you will want to import build pipeline from pipeline gold, which is the completed kind of code. If you want to instead build your own or fill in the blanks, you will then instead switch out this one and then go to the pipeline module to kind of fill out the small bit of code that I have set up. And so just to give you a sense of what this looks like, right, we can, if I go to the terminal, here, and sorry, if this isn't large enough, let me know. So if you go to email, make sure you're in the email assistant v1 directory, and then you do python app.py. We can then open up our little Gradio app. And just like we did kind of yesterday, we can upload a PDF, and then we can prompt, write a haiku about this profile. Oh, did I? Empty array. Did I? Oops. Sorry. I need to go back to my code. App.py. Sorry, I need to import the gold version, and that's why this failed, because I haven't completed it. And then I need to restart the Gradio app. Let's see, here we go. And write a haiku. So you can see here that given a PDF, we giving some instructions and getting some sort of output. And so I'm going to now peel back the onion a little to go back and say how we're doing it without using something like Llama Index. If I'm going too slowly or too quickly, hopefully there's enough instruction in the READMEs for each of the applications you can kind of follow along. But just to kind of peel back the onion, what's going on? So in Pipeline Gold, I am introducing a framework called Burr. The point of Burr is really to help you kind of think graphically, right, as to kind of what's going on. And so there is an explanation in the notebook, but I'm going to, I think in terms of time, just explain it and what it looks like here. So as I said, we're kind of building out a pipeline. And so what this pipeline is two steps. The first is, given a PDF, we can kind of extract some text from it. And then the next step then is we're going to generate an email. Sorry, I should have named this something. We're not generating an email just yet. We're generating a response. So apologies for the naming here. But what it's doing is reading in, taking some PDF text, creating an OpenAI call, and then with setting the right kind of system messages and kind of context to create a response. Very kind of straightforward. If you run this app and then in a second terminal, right, type in Burr, which should have been installed via dependencies, right, you will then see a little kind of UI that comes up. And if you have run the Gradio app successfully, you'll see Email Assistant v1 come up. And from there, we can then kind of click in and see that this is our zoom out a little. This is our pipeline, right? 2 steps. The idea is we have mentally constructed a little bit of a graph, right? But the internals of the code, right, is something that we control and we have kind of written. Lost anyone? No, all right. No. Yeah. So so this is where in the so the pipeline. So under email assistant v1, there is a pipeline and a pipeline goal. App is the Gradio app, and yeah, pipeline is Burr. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So there's you write a function. So the key things with Burr in terms of is that you're reading and writing to a central state object. Since with these LLMs, context is kind of key, and so in which case the idea is that each function represents an action, and then so in this action we are processing a PDF. It doesn't have to have an LLM call in it, as you can kind of see here, but we are just taking in, say, a file path and then putting in updating text. And so we're reading, writing to a state object. We're doing something similar for the generate kind of response action rather than email. But then in terms of building the pipeline here, you can kind of see that we're creating an application, saying what the actions are, and then stitching them together as to like how they connect. So how do things transition? And then we're specifying where in the graph we start, providing some identifiers and some tracking, so that's what shows up in the UI. But this is where the extent of the Burr framework is effectively you write whatever functions you want, annotate them, but they have to read and write from a state object. Then you're creating a graph, and then in terms of how it runs, if you go to the app side of things, you can see here that we're basically building a pipeline, and then saying what we want to kind of run through. So we want to stop after the generate email kind of action, and these are the inputs here, right, to it. And then to populate the UI, we're then picking out the resultant state, which is LLM reply, and then populating the UI with it. Yep.
On the surface, Burr usually supported lane graph. What are your thoughts on sort of having to use on one together?
Yeah, I mean, so we slightly designed, so very similar concept. Help you, basically, if you can mentally think in a graph, right, can you represent it in code? And so from a mental perspective, pretty similar. API is somewhat similar-ish. I want to say we've made, I think I'm biased, obviously, but I think our API is simpler. People tell us that. And so, but we don't preclude any ecosystem. So you could use Llama Index with Burr, you could use LangChain, you could use whatever. And so LangGraph kind of predisposes you or assumes you're going to be using the entire LangChain ecosystem, which is not the case with Burr. No one's created issues on it. We do have a pretty pluggable serialization framework, and so serialization being if you want to kind of have durability or start from where you kind of left off, like there are a bunch of constructs in Burr. I'm happy to dive deeper afterwards, but in terms of the comparison with LangGraph, similar, but I want to say my intent is to always make sure that we don't get in the way of people, just like Fast API doesn't get in the way of trying to make it really easy to customize and kind of layer in the things you need without impacting the way that you write logic. Yeah, that's open source. Yeah. Correct. Actually, yeah. So the big thing is that this UI here is pip installable. It's open, local. Yeah. There are other things in the UI where you can start to annotate, which we'll kind of go through. We can also do costy stuff, but the main thing is that you can kind of also see state that was went in. Yeah. So you want to go to you want to open up a new terminal. And then in the new terminal window, just type in BURR. So what I have it here. So just type in Burr. Cool. Yep. Yeah. So cool. All right. Let me. Okay. I thought I would have skip this, but no. All right. Let's go. So the idea with, so here's a very simple example in the notebook is of creating a counter that kind of increments and then exits. And so the idea with Burr is you kind of, write some functions, you can annotate them. There's, if you're familiar with React, we do have an object-oriented way to kind of define it if you need more kind of, some more fine-grained controls. But the idea is that, you can build a graph, right? And then the way that transitions work is that you can have a default transition, right, where it always kind of does it, or you can have a conditional one. There's many ways to kind of specify this, but the idea is depending on what's in state. So in this example, we are reading, in the increment, we're reading a counter and we're writing to it, right? And so this is, there's going to be a field counter in our state object. And so here we're basically having a conditional because of the way that it's ordered. Hey, go to increment if the counter value is less than 10. Does that help?
Next question. Trying to figure out how to use this library versus this kind of library versus, let's say,
So Burr has async IO hooks, so you can run Burr async. And so I wouldn't say, to me that's a and question, not an or question.
What I meant is build that the construction throughout
Yep.
that kind of declarative.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If you do a symbol and function, basically have
Yep. So you might want, so I have another framework called Hamilton that is, sounds like it's that. We have people using async where you can define a graph async and kind of do that. But it's more of a pipeline, less so a graph that has loops and cycles. Good question. Anyway. Right. And so just to clear up on Burr, so when you create the application, right, this is where you can layer in some of your production concerns. And so one of them is that this is where we attach the tracker, right, and that's how, when this runs, this will then also log to the kind of UI that you can kind of see. But yeah, getting back to kind of V1, if you want the some code to do, the idea is given this pipeline, right, you can always go see what we did in gold, but just fill in the messages kind of API construct, right, and then, in terms of setting up for kind of V2, right, if we're going to be building this email app, right, and we want to kind of extract stuff from a PDF, right, we probably want to extract a few things. So like, extract name, position, and skills. This is, we haven't prompted ChatGPT, right? But it's given me what looks like a reasonable answer. As software engineers, or if we're going to use it, right, what would be our next step here? We would want to parse it. So why don't we just ask ChatGPT to give me a structured response, right? And you can see here it's actually done, what looks to be a reasonable job. I don't know if it's valid or not, but like it says it has, right? So write a haiku and, but the key with the non-determinism here is that, oh look, maybe depending on how we prompt, some things will be, here, if I run this again, it'll probably change the structure, right? As you can kind of see here, it kind of changed the structure. So in which case, you can get LLMs to prompt stuff into more structured stuff, but again, the non-determinism kind of makes this a little tricky or challenging as to like how to parse it. So what are you to do? If I go back to the notebook, where I was setting this stuff up, you can. Most providers now have a term called structured outputs. If you've heard of function calling, it's kind of a very similar kind of approach to things, but effectively the idea is, hey, if you're always going to be parsing something out of the response of these apps, then they now have API hooks to make that much easier to do. So in the way that this kind of works, right, is say I've got news wires of financial news, and I want to extract out, say, the company, the ticker, and what was the price at the end of the day, right? What's one way that I can do that, right? So I can, as you can kind of see here, just prompt things, have a system prompt. You can even say, hey, return this JSON, right? And you can kind of see it it does its thing. It kind of, but where is it? Sorry. And this is okay. With this particular context and prompt, I'm fairly sure this is pretty stable. But if you were to have something more complex, right? This isn't the case. So instead, what you can kind of do is if you're familiar with Pydantic, is that you can create a Pydantic class. The Pydantic class here represents the structured output we want the LLM to kind of return. And so rather than asking, as I kind of did here, asking for the company stock price and ticker, we instead will define this kind of model here, say the same things, but use a slightly different API here. So they do mark it as beta, but so far as I know, it's been pretty stable, where you can kind of specify, hey, parse things out, and you then get the parsed response from the message, and if we run this, right, you'll get back a ticker result object, which maps to this class. So now you've saved yourself a lot of time parsing what the output is. You can now instead simply define a Pydantic model and then specify it and then get some structured output back. Yep. Yeah, why don't we do that? And not specify the type. Yeah, you can see it just works. Right. Yeah. So this helps speed up, or at least make things a little more usable. Output from an LLM, right? And so then you can then treat it as an object and just get whatever you want out. Cool. So. So that leads into the setup for the second one. So the second V2 is a slightly more complex version of V1, but we now, if I go to Pipeline Gold, the idea is we now, rather than kind of prompting as before I kind of did here this way, instead we're going to encode, write a little profile model that's going to say the things we want to extract. The key things to note that I missed is that actually these description fields and what the descriptions are actually help the LLM. They actually provide it as context as to what should be kind of extracted, right? And so this is something potentially to play with as you're kind of going to be building things. And so if you want to fill in or play with it, then there's if you find the to-dos, there's a couple of them in the pipeline to kind of I think, well, actually, maybe that's the only one. But the other thing we kind of did was just come up with a basic string that is some sort of fixed template that we want to fill, right? Just to keep this basic, and we've then just added a new function in. In the kind of Burr pipeline where it's using the structured output and then linking that structured output to create an email kind of template. So if I go to my terminal, right, I have to kill the prior app and I go to V2 and then I do Python app.py, making sure I have got the got the golden one ready. So now given a PDF, right, we're not specifying any prompt, we're not specifying any inputs, we've kind of specified that in code, and we're just getting the PDF to kind of extract out certain things and fill in this email template. So the let's see, the exercise that yeah. So if you need instructions of like what you want to do, they're obviously in the notebook. So task, if you want to play around with it, play around with the Pydantic model. You can obviously change it, augment the email template to ask for more different things, right? If you're thinking of a better email, but as you're doing this, like one of the things that I think to try to loop back to the software development lifecycle is start to talk about kind of testing and how would you actually get something like simple like this pipeline into production. And so under yeah, I'll pause there. Any questions thus far? All right. If you need help, Hugo's around. Let's see. So, does anyone, if I just go to this app, what are some of the things that you would want to kind of test or ensure that this kind of thing works? What do you generally do as a software engineer as your first thing, right? Or at least, what do most people commonly do on the path to production is they write some sort of unit tests. Unit test, right? But then what does a unit test look like in the case where, given some profile, I am extracting some user data with an LLM? I mean, do you think you need to have one test and you're good? Why is that? Yeah. I mean, so expand on the so many things. Yep. 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 Sure. So it's a function of the inputs as well, right? And so this is part of the challenge, right? Of you can probably as I'm developing this, make this work really well for my profile, right? But then that's not real life. That's people are going to have other profiles. Maybe some things are missing, some things are not. And so this is where, this is part of that struggle of like, okay, so how do we actually build to something reliable? So with the way that things are set up with Burr, in terms of kind of testing things, right? This function, in terms of extracting PDFs, is pretty deterministic, right? And so this is where in your CI pipeline you're going to have deterministically things, so you're going to have regular unit tests, right? But what's really kind of the thing that I think is important in this example, at least, because the email is a straight template swap. That's, I think, again, fairly deterministic, pretty easy to kind of think about testing. But really, it's kind of like, how do you ensure that like, you're getting ensuring that this is doing what it's doing. This is where you need to have data, basically, right? So the only way that you can kind of prove that or be confident in it is to have some quote unquote kind of data points to kind of exercise it. And so the most kind of basic way that you can kind of think about it is just like you need to somehow create context that's realistic, right? That then you can then actually work on in a test-driven manner, right? So you can actually be somewhat test-driven in terms of this development, right? If you structure your application appropriately, kind of a bit like with Burr, as an example, but like if you just want to exercise, if we just want to unit test this kind of extract user data function, all we need to do is set up the appropriate state for it, right? And then obviously this will actually be doing an LLM call, right? And so not a pure unit test, so to speak, because we're actually doing an API call out to somewhere else. But the short answer is like you have to create data or have real data or something that then try to exercise it and then see like does it do the thing it's supposed to do. And so the short answer is there is no easy path out other than you really have to understand your data and your context, right? And so this is where part of the idea with the framework of something like Burr is that if we really wanted to say if I go back to this email assistant, right? What I would really want to test is to like any traces that come through here. So say you saw that and it did something weird, right? You'd want to ideally take that context and then be able to kind of use it to test against to then build it as a guardrail, so to speak, to ensure that the app behaves. And so I'm not going to show that here, but Burr does have some facilities here to help create a test fixture. So given a prior trace, take the data inputs and if it was successful, the outputs, and create a test fixture from it and help you bootstrap some of that PyTest code. But this is where in this example here for the test pipeline gold, where I've kind of filled out things. So if you want to do it yourself, right? Basically you have to come up with some PDF context and then figure out what you really want to test. And so this is kind of what I'm kind of showing an example here of. Yeah, so I mean, so in terms of if I go to the kind of the graph view here, if you're really worried about that, you could insert a step between process PDF and extract user data, and check for it in the prompt. Like, so there's various means of checking are the inputs correct, are people asking the right types of questions, right? You don't have to group them all together. They could be explicit steps in your kind of pipeline or workflow, right? And so, but then there's also vendors who are selling an API call to kind of do that for you as well. So the key construct here is like you have to model it somehow in terms of your process, but then there's many ways you can kind of solve it.
So in that case, if you wanted to run the evaluation ahead of time, you could purposely create like a PDF that has instructions.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think this is where if you hear the term synthetic data, that's kind of what people are meaning is like coming up with somewhat realistic test cases to help you. This is where LLMs can actually be. You can use the generative side. So there are people who are using LLMs to generate this like input potential queries or other stuff, and then you have to have a human then to obviously evaluate the outputs to know whether they're useful or not. But then that gives you a data set that you can at least have some sort of confidence that if you run and you look at the outputs and then you score the percentages or something, that like how well are you moving in the right direction or not. Yeah. So as opposed to regular software engineering, there's a lot of gray here, right? Cool. The other side is given, so in terms of the LinkedIn profile that was set up with the kind of the gold pipeline, right? It tries to extract name, latest role, top skills, and achievements. What's interesting, again, with LLMs, though, is that some of these things might be not existent. Some should always be there, right? And so in terms of like this app in of itself, right, figuring out what to assert on is also a bit of an open question. Do you always want to fail a test suite where if something's not there? Or is it not an assert, it's more of a warning like, hey, we didn't extract this thing out. And so there are packages and libraries here that try to help some of this easier. There's also with PyTest, if you're familiar, has a lot of plugins, and so there are people who are like logging some of these, and then you have a data frame at the end that you can then evaluate. But this is the other kind of challenge with writing tests or guardrails, so to speak, is also figuring out like how strong of an assert do you want to kind of use? Do you want to make sure that things fail? Or is it okay if some things fail? Because say in this top skills component, the LLM might not get everything every time, but it's important that the most salient things are always gotten right. And so the short answer is it really depends on your domain as to how stringent or how you want these checks to be. So and so in which case this is where, like, if you want to play around with this and figure out like how can you write a test that passes most of the time, right? This is the bit of the challenge. Okay. So that's V2. Let's see. I want to go back to. Yes, and so so the other way to kind of look at this kind of data that we kind of created, or at least if you think about if you're going to create test fixtures, so meaning like, because you could parameterize this function, for example, with kind of inputs. If you're using them as part of your CI system, you're generally using them as some sort of guardrails. But then what happens then is, like, say this is running in production, right, and you're using something, something to log the traces, right? The thing that you'll then want to do, right, is start to kind of curate actual real life things, right? So this is where, in terms of the measure of how good this app actually is, right? In our CI suite, we can at least try to validate, like, hey, are we not going to hallucinate? Are we going to do the right thing given this particular context or query, right? But then to know how well it's actually performing, you have to evaluate on kind of real data, right? And so this is where the other side of telemetry and tracing is, it's not only to help you debug, but then because with Datadog, CPU and memory like just gives you the health of the system, but with LLM calls, the data, the input and outputs is something that you can then use to measure, like, is this LLM call actually being effective, right? Is it doing the most thing right most of the time? Because then this is where you then need to, in terms of the this iteration loop, right, with where's the picture? With this picture, right, is like you got to take those logs and traces, right, and then have some human evaluate them. Is this what we expect, or is this a good enough solution, right? And so this is where, at least in this V2 exercise, I didn't show the logging traces thing, but you can see that in the Burr app, and you can start to kind of say something was correct or not, right? And so yesterday we built a SQLite database with a thumbs up, thumbs down thing, right? So same kind of concept here is that when things run, you're going to have to curate them, and then some portion of them you're going to be adding as kind of tests or unit tests, and then others you're going to take from production and evaluate that, and and combine the two to really understand whether your app is performing and reliable. Questions? Here, close that one. So we did structured outputs. E2. So moving on to the kind of V3. This is now we're going to replace the we're going to have the LLM generate the email for us. And then we're going to have a back and forth with the LLM to kind of tweak and change and kind of do it. So the first two kind of examples are very much pipeliney, right? They were very much just do X, Y, and Z, extract and kind of use. Now we're going to have a little bit of kind of add in some turn taking to make this more of a energetic human in the loop kind of workflow. It's not going to be full agent because it's not going to be making autonomous decisions, though that is one of the extensions you can kind of add. But in terms of progression, in terms of what I've seen people go to production, it's generally ship a pipeline-y thing first and then add in something where it's some turn taking and human in the loop, so you can curate and make sure you're not shipping kind of bad stuff. And then once the human in the loop stuff is working well, then you can move to something more automated where an agent kind of does stuff. And so if you want to do some coding, the idea is in the V3 version, if you go to assistant There's a bunch of to-dos in terms of just adding in kind of conversation history, right, and just making kind of filling in some of the gaps to make kind of things work. But if you don't want to do that, you can obviously just use the gold version that's set up. Things to kind of think about would be, just play with the app, think about it from an experience perspective, and then we're going to, I guess, spend a few minutes and then just talk about like, well, what would production look like? What do you test? And then talk more high level as to also business metrics. But so in terms of running this app, right, we just need to go to our terminal again. We need to stop the prior one, go to the v3 directory and do Python app.py. Let's see. Again, if you want to do your own, you just got to switch the import and then fill in the details. And in terms of walking through the app, right? So it is doing some structured output, right? So it is taking. So we're going to be extracting certain things, assuming a LinkedIn profile again. No change to extracting the PDF. No change to extracting data from it. We're then, instead of using an email template and taking the user data and just kind of sticking it in, we're instead going to provide some instructions along with the context to then have the LLM kind of create the email for us. We're then going to transition to a kind of user action. So we're going to wait for some feedback, and then that's then going to go to and iterate on email, which is basically going to utilize the chat history to store context, right? We're going to send full chat history each and every single time, and this is then we're going to use the LLM as a something agentic to help us kind of refine and kind of change this email. In terms of everything, there are no conditional edges, right? And so nothing too complex there, but just to give you a little bit of a sense of what's happening. So you can take a PDF. Here we have the system prompts. So system prompt here sets a bit of the context, right? So you can kind of set a bit of a tone, right? But otherwise, from the recruiting email perspective, actually I should probably do I need Hugo's profile. I'll download it. All right, and cool. Have that. I'm going to. Where's it? Right. Email to recruit them for my developer evangelist role at DAGWorks. I think. Right. So as before, so I walked through before that, like this is the system prompt we're sending. This will be the system prompt. This is in kind of the user instructions, but the context, as we can kind of see here, is what's being actually sent to the LLM. So provided some user data. We are sending this as JSON, right? And so this is where it doesn't have to be. LLMs are actually turns out reasonable at parsing this, but you could structure this differently to get slightly improved performance or results. But you can kind of see here that these are my instructions, and then it kind of wrote a nice email for me. I didn't have to prompt it too much, but and we can kind of see on the right hand side what the extracted structured outputs were from his PDF, right? So I can then go make it shorter, add some emoji and an Australian joke because he's from Melbourne. And so you can see here that it now has added some emoji. I don't know where the joke is, but oh yeah, there we go. Why do kangaroos hate rainy days? because the kids have to play inside. Anyway. And so with this app, right, like, so this is the extent in terms of like the app building, right? And so hopefully here, at least from a structural perspective, right, we can go to the Burr kind of and kind of see our trace. We can kind of see the decision making, and if I was to continue this application, let's see, add my name to the signature, and my name, you know, so yeah, we can see that this is, you know, now iterating on the step, and if I do live, we can see that it finished. So this is with the Burr UI, I guess we have some telemetry and tracing, right? In terms of the tasks to kind of talk about, so this first part was a pipeline, right? Just to reiterate, but then we added in this kind of you know, looping component to help us you know, refine this email with the use of an LLM. In the prior one, we kind of talked a little bit about kind of the unit testing side, right? In terms of this version of this app, any thoughts on how do we, you know, measure or ship or think about kind of testing and evals? Right. So in terms of where would that help us? So user feedback. Yep. I mean, so yeah, we've now built something that a human is using. We now have the leverage to potentially, you know, add in some buttons. Was this useful or not? Another way to think about it is potentially how many edits, how many conversation turns does something take, right? And so because, you know, it's kind of in this kind of iterate on emails, right? There isn't much business logic here to test. Right, it's really the only thing you have really control over is, you know, the prompt going in and the context, right? And so, from a testing perspective, this is other than like if you have particular tone and style or other things in your application, they're, you know, unlike the structured extraction one, which was very clear. I think that it's very easy to write some sort of test for of like, given this data, does the LLM do the right thing? With this one now, it's a little bit more fuzzy, and so in which case I think going towards user signals. So did this work, or how does it work? Is probably going to, you know, at least in the short term, be the better kind of path to approach it. What else? Cool. In terms of, say, a CEO though, like what would they want to know, or how would they think it? If you were to build this kind of little Copilot app, what would they want to know? I mean, privacy, right? Yeah, I guess. The other is are people responding to this email? Is this generative AI even worth it, right? So zooming out to the macro level. So remember that like we're all building something to try to build business value with, right? And so I had been building up in terms of the test, like the guardrails, does it do its thing? Does the LLM call in general in production, is it evaluating, right? But ultimately this rolls up to something where you're trying to provide some business value, right? And so so the important thing there to kind of also think of through this app is to try to make sure that you can measure some sort of business impact, right? Because then that will help safeguard your jobs or like safeguard the initiative, right? Because if everyone says this is cool, but it doesn't move business metrics, well, why'd you do it? So that is, I think that problem in general exists with MLOps or machine learning or any AI, is making sure you can have the top level business metrics, right, that you can kind of umbrella on. But if you were to ship this to production, right, one key thing is like definitely make sure you can measure business metrics. Because else everyone's going to be, the CEO will be very cynical. If CEO goes, that looks great, but like what's it doing for the business? So yeah. Let's see what else. Hugo, any thoughts on that? Comments? What do I have? Right. Yes. Yeah, so the other side, I guess, yeah, from a productionization standpoint, right, because this app does a little bit more, right, there are certain parts of this pipeline or this app that we can test better than others. And so, this is where synthetic data, at least on, if you're trying to come up with ideas on like how do I test, instructions or these things, this is where you can kind of user feedback or having LLMs generate kind of inputs and other things can kind of help you here. But otherwise, yeah, in terms of safeguarding things, this is probably the things to fall back on are making sure you can test the things you can test, getting the right data sets, and then when things are more fuzzy, you need to lean on more kind of user feedback, and then obviously making sure that things tie up to business metrics. Cool. In terms of, we only have like, I guess, 20 minutes left or so. For those who need ideas for extensions, right? We haven't really used the LLM to try to reason about anything quite so deeply. But one of the extensions you could do is you could actually provide in a job description, right? And then ask the LLM, is this a candidate a right fit for it? This is where that's something to play around with, right? How do you get the reasoning out from it? If you want to do more raggy stuff, one of the extensions would be for this app would be to build out kind of components before to choose which PDFs to process given a query. So maybe you're a recruiter and you're like, I have a database of PDFs. I want to find the best engineer that does X. That is a great use case for RAG. That then, if the next step is I want to write an email, could just plug into this kind of system. And then what was it? Oh, yeah. And then we didn't cover function calling here, just due to time. But one of the extensions that you can kind of easily do potentially is, ask the LLM to try to give you some information to figure out, or rather, to extract the location from the person, right, and then call a weather API kind of endpoint to then to do that. That could be a reasonable extension of this kind of application, right? But yeah, I don't know, I'll pause there. Happy to take more discussion. We got like 20 minutes else. It's what do I have here? More discussion-y topics, but really this is where I want to make sure that I'm answering questions you guys came here to get answered. So. Yeah. Yeah.
I had an idea for something, so I have a podcast that's been running for 10 years, and even no transcriptions or anything there, and I thought, like, what would be nice to build something that goes, parses out the RSS feed, gets what it needs, downloads and transcribes, like, it's a whole thing, and I've been trying to figure out how this would play in. I think it would have to have some kind of that in
Yeah.
would be like, for my listeners to be able to just say, hey, I want to listen to an episode about this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that would have like kind of this run-in kind of situation, but it sounds like it's also going back component.
Yeah, or some sort of search component. So I mean, RAG is good for semantic similarity. So meaning, if you think about keyword search, right, it just means that you don't need keyword search. It can kind of expand it, right? And it can help disambiguate kind of words that or terms that are kind of ambiguous. But you can get keyword search will be the first thing to try before bringing in a vector store, and then the next step would then you can start to do embeddings, right? That then
So you could use the LLM to kind of reference the keyword search.
Yeah, I mean, because like if you think about the
So I think a lot of
yeah.
people would also suggest like doing keyword search and doing like benchmarking with BM25 or something
Yeah.
like that, right? Before doing any kind of
Yeah. So BM,
It's like a three-step kind of rag.
yeah, I mean, because
But it's also fun to do RAG as well. So if you want to do something with generative AI and that type of stuff, that's reason enough. But
Yeah, I mean, so it's a search problem ultimately. It's like what context do you put into the prompt? That's what kind of RAG is trying to solve. And there's many like old school techniques of like, well, keyword search, find the right thing, and put that in, right? So yeah.
Right now you show like you directly working the app and looking at the telemetry for it. Is it possible to look after the patch, like a week or stuff happen?
Yeah, I mean, so in terms of at least this Burr, this is all saved locally, right? There are obviously you can self-host, or like you can send it to S3. The thing that I guess I didn't show is that so you can, one of the things we can start to do is we can start to kind of curate things, right? And so this is where you can type in notes, and then once you start to kind of curate things with Burr, we can then go for a project, right, and kind of see kind of what we've curated, and then you can start to also download a CSV that kind of outputs the stuff. So this is where, as I was saying, the total cost of ownership kind of increases with generative AI, because you do need to kind of expend energy on tracing and then looking at it and then curating it, right? So that way you can kind of understand where the errors are or where the bad experiences are, and then iterate from there. But yeah, did I answer your question? Go. Let's see. Fun. All right. Yeah, let's see. So otherwise, I mean, in terms of slowly starting to wrap up, right? So things to think about in terms of taking an LLM or getting it to, with an LLM to production, right? Is the first thing, the easiest thing is I think is a kind of a pipeline type thought, right? This is what we did in V1 of the app. Is build a simple pipeline that just basically, or actually V2 rather is probably the better example of, given a PDF, extract some things from it, and stick it into an email template. You could obviously change the email template to be a database, right? So extract stuff, put it into a database, right? That is a pretty kind of common thing, but the key point is that there aren't any loops. And then in terms of, I think before going full agent and going, hey, we can automate something, design for something with human in the loop, right? Because really the key to understanding whether you can actually automate something fully is you need to have data, right? And if you can have humans curate the data first, then you can kind of build out this data set that then can, you can then have something to work off when you try to fully automate it. The key for human in the loop though is two things, which I didn't really, didn't dive into much, but observability helps, right? And so or designing experiences just like we kind of did here, where this is kind of visible, and then I didn't add the thumbs up and thumbs down button, but really, this experience is still on the onus of the recruiter or the email sender to kind of make use of the generative AI kind of, and to kind of use it.
Stefan, do you have Slack open by any chance? I'll also just share the link with you that I'll put in the doc of further resources that we'll share at the end. But this is actually a post that I love by Simon Willison on embedding generally. He goes through a lot of interesting patterns for building search engines and that type of stuff, and he actually ends up building something for his website from this blog, essentially, which allows you to search his website. And it's super cool. He links to all the code and all of those things. So he's a wonderful educator. So put that on.
Yeah, so we, let's see what else. Cool. So, discussion, which is easier.
Stefan, I also included a bit.ly.
Oh, yes.
Slack for the next steps.
Yep. Cool. So, I kind of talked about this. So, I guess, in 90 minutes, we tried to process a lot, so hopefully you got a bit of the tip of things, but basically, right, there's ways that you can use LLMs, write code, that you can have an LLM call in your unit test, right? So a few kind of thoughts around that. But then, to ensure, how do you know whether your app's performing? You're going to have to trace stuff and then evaluate those things, right? And so there is many tools there to kind of help with that, Burr and the Burr UI being one of them. We didn't really touch into too much of like how to compute metrics all things, but suffice to say, thumbs up, thumbs down, and basically, percentage is a great place to start and will get you kind of 80-20 very far, and then what you do with that data, right, is you tweak and you change the prompt generally, right. Until you have much data, fine-tuning isn't something you should be concerned about, because you can get a lot of juice out of just tweaking and changing the prompt. It could be making the prompt shorter and having more API calls. So in the case of the extraction task, right? If I'm where's my pipeline? Sorry. You'll probably find is that if you were to add in 10 different things to extract, the performance of this would probably degrade. And so one of the things you might end up doing then is shortening, is making multiple of these, right? And having successive or concurrent LLM calls to extract very specific things, because you want to reduce that variance. But this is something you can play around with, in your unit test as you're being kind of test driven.
And also
Yep.
to your point earlier of if you're automating emails,
Yep.
like the emails working,
Okay. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
So that's
honestly, sitting down with domain, like who used to write the emails before we tried to automate it, right? Sit down with them and they'll be like, this isn't right, and that's wrong, and this was the template. But sit down with them for 10 minutes each morning and put the emails in a spreadsheet and make them thumb up, thumbs down what your automated system is producing. And you can bootstrap a lot more synthetic data using that as well to create more emails. So some of the resources we're linking to,
Yeah.
blog posts, we talk about more of those things.
Yeah. So in short, like effectively what Hugo was kind of saying is you got to know your data, right? And so really, this is where, in terms of what you test, how you evaluate, what you look at, right? That's really very important. And then in terms of just to bring it home a little bit of like, there is the micro dimension of each LM call, and so thinking about how do you evaluate or test or think about it for each one. There's obviously in the macro, the business context. And then guardrails, right, is something that like help you ensure that your app is kind of working. But then evals is more of a like a measure of kind of performance. Like, is it actually doing what it's supposed to be doing? We do have a Maven course starting in January that is kind of a deeper 4-week deep dive into the topics we kind of talked today. In terms of next steps, would love. I'll post this here. Actually, what is the easiest place to... Do you have a bit.ly link for the form?
Yeah, it's in that document actually. The form is at the very top of the document.
Yeah, but it's not a bit.ly link.
No, but if you
Oh, yeah. Yeah, sure. Is it in the... Oh, what's the bit.ly link for the doc? Is it the same one? Oh, AI for Squeeze. Okay, got it. Oh, so if you go to bit.ly, AI Squeeze, right? Actually, no. All right. Sorry, Hugo. What is the bit.ly link for it?
For what?
For the next steps document.
It was, let's go back to Slack, and so AI,
Oh, next steps.
Squeeze, next steps.
My bad.
And just a bit on our Maven course, we're still building it out, but if any of you have any feedback on what you'd like to see in the next iteration of this course, please do reach out, let us know. It's going to be a 4-week course. There's an early bird discount, and we've given 25% more off here if you use that coupon in November as well. And I don't know, did anyone see Charles's talk about Modal yesterday? Yeah, so Modal's just told us they're generously providing $1,000 of credit for their platform for all our students as well. So if you sign up for $600, you're making money.
So so AI bit.ly AI-SWES-next-steps will take you to this Google Doc. Would love for you to kind of fill out this form. This is the first time we're kind of giving this workshop, so do be honest. We're from down under. We can take it. Would love to know how we can kind of make it better, obviously. And otherwise, in terms of further reading, right? So this is where the resourcing, next steps. There's a bunch of people who have blog about this and write about this. So if you hear the name Eugene Yang, Hamil Hussein, or Shreya Shankar, we have some posts here on further reading that will then deepen and give you kind of more insights into some of the stuff we kind of covered as well. But yeah. Yeah, so if you go to, yeah. Yeah, sorry. You add in dash next dash steps to the same one as from yesterday.
Curious for prompt optimization, do you think the DSPY and SQL are useful?
Yeah, the question is prompt optimization. So DSPY is in itself a framework, and so it does have some of the issues of just it being a little black boxy because of just that it does. But what I've seen, it's only useful if you have some sort of data. So you can't really use them. You need to have, because the way that they work is they kind of, you have some gold standard data sets and they try to kind of optimize that, right? And so you got to have some data first to really kind of use them. The way that I see them is that people kind of use them as a way to bootstrap potentially, or like, hey, is there some better way that I can get some better outcomes given some eval sets? I think where things are moving is that there are some frameworks, a new one came out of Microsoft a couple of months ago where you can kind of incorporate it into almost any framework and it will try to like optimize some things. But the struggle I have with them from a productionization standpoint is you really want to know what the prompt is when you go to production. And DSPY does not make that easy to kind of see. You need to do some things to extract it, right, to really understand, because what you don't want is to optimize and have your experience changing on each kind of push to production. You kind of want to do it once, have it static, and then see how you can kind of tune it. But yeah, things are moving here, but really where people are using them is to like, yeah, how can I bootstrap or optimize, or different ways that I could prompt something to get better output. They're not doing anything numerical, so it's not really hard math or science. They're just, if you look at the internals of the code, they're asking an LLM to like, what's a better prompt, right? And so then they're just kind of for loop iterating over that kind of in simplistic terms. I think it's called Trace. I think it just might be called Trace. But yeah, like research here is interesting. But yeah, a lot of it is driven by researchers who want to like just get better performance and output on things. But the question then there is like, yeah, when do you run it in your software development lifecycle? Is it more like traditional machine learning where it's a hyperparameter optimization technique, where it's just kind of like you run it once, find some values, and you kind of stick with it? Or is it something, yeah, like, yeah, or can you use it more often? Is kind of an open question. Cool. Yeah. Well, thanks for hanging out on a Friday at a conference. Tried to make this lightweight, so not too much. I'm doing better on time than I thought it would. So, but otherwise, yeah. If there's things that would be useful to talk through or go back to, happy to zoom back. Else, yeah, we're around and happy to chat. Yep.